Okay, we'll get Mr. Martin to sit down. Good afternoon. I call this meeting to order. Would you please join me in the pledge to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag. Good afternoon, everybody. This is our second meeting in a row starting in the afternoon. I'm not used to this. Well, I'll tell you, I couldn't believe when I drove up yesterday afternoon in a blinding snowstorm, and and I came from a place in Columbia County where it was about 55 degrees and the sun was out and all the snow was melting, and so I think it's still winter up here. Probably the good news is, I don't know about you, but I've been waiting since October for daylight savings time to arrive, so it's great to be out there at about 6 o'clock or 6:30 and it's still light out. So hopefully it's a reminder that spring is around the corner. Also, March brings us a couple of things. It brings us a 2018 annual report, which Terry is going to present to us today. I urge all of you to take a look. It's really easy to forget all of the things that we did last year, and it's a nice reminder of what we've done, and also I think some things of what's yet to come. The staff and board members are working together on some great projects for this year, as you well know, and I look forward to sharing them with the public as we move forward. The other thing I just want to mention is with spring coming, and I know it seems so early, it's still winter out there with all the snowbanks, but it also means the emergence of bugs and particularly ticks. And last month we had a fascinating presentation on a number of subjects, including what's going on with climate change and ticks here in the North Country, as well as some of the viruses that it brings with it. And one of the things that I learned in talking to Leanne Sporn was that she's part of a statewide group of just different organizations that are dealing with tick-borne diseases and research across the state. And they receive funding from the state senate of $1 million, and Paul Smith gets $30,000 of it. And with the change in parties in the Senate, there was some question about whether that funding would be there, and I'm happy to report, at least at this moment, that funding is there. Has been proposed in the state Senate's budget. Hopefully, it will be in the assemblies as well, in the chamber, and we can move forward to continue that funding, because particularly in the North Country, Paul Smith does about they work with about 8 or 9 counties on detecting ticks and with the health department. So really important. I'm hopeful that that money is going to be restored. Also, I'm looking forward to some presentations today and tomorrow. Chris Nowitzki today on Salt Road Reduction Initiative in Lake George, and then tomorrow I think we have the Birch Boys chaga on chaga harvesting. And I have a huge chunk of chaga sitting in my refrigerator, so I hope they're going to tell me what I can do with it. It's good for a lot of things. Anyway, enough about that. We've got a great meeting coming up, and I think we'll start first with public comment. The only thing I will mention to anybody who wishes to comment this afternoon is just a reminder that you cannot have any comment on anything that's coming before us at this meeting. We will have additional public comment tomorrow once our agency votes on things, and then our board votes, and then you can certainly have comments on anything related to what's on our agenda. So having said that, is there anybody who would like to give public comment?
Madam Chair, could you introduce Matt?
Ah, okay. Matt, you're at Tebow, right? Yes. You are taking Lynn Mahoney's place today, so thank you for joining us. I apologize. That was an omission. So welcome.
Thank you for the welcome.
You've been here a few times, I believe, so
I have.
glad to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay. Okay, so any public comment out there? All right, seeing none, let's approve the February 14th, 15th draft agency minutes. Does anybody have any comments?
I'll make a motion to
You make a
approve.
motion? We have a second? Any changes, comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you, that is done. Any recusals for today? Next is a motion for executive session. And my understanding is that tomorrow morning, we'd like to have an executive session at 9 a.m. before we start for about a half an hour to just discuss a couple of things. So I would, litigation, correct? Okay, Bill, move it. I have a second? Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor? All right, so 9 o'clock tomorrow, we will have an executive session on gets an update on some litigation for about a half an hour. So Bill, who asked me that question, what time we're starting tomorrow? Bill, you did, I think. Yes, okay. All right, next is the executive director's report, and Terry, you're going to fill us in on 2018.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Everybody's sitting on new chairs. Yay.
Our posture is much improved.
Good. It's an honor to be here this afternoon to talk with you about 2018, a year of awesome achievement here at the agency. We've documented the year in the annual report, which you all have copies of. There's some that we made available, but most importantly, they are on the web. So along with all the attachments, the board highlights, the division reports, all connected. Thank you very much to Keith McKeever for everything he's done. He's become quite the whiz in terms of this kind of desktop work. We know that the board highlights present all activities which took place during the year, during board meetings and across the divisions. So it included those staffing announcements that we had, tours such as the photo that you see here today of the Mount Van Hovenberg complex. It's a great photo. When we took that tour with Mike Pratt following the board meeting, the public was with us. It's a great shot. We also know that the highlights include presentations that we've had, such as the Diversity Initiative presentation by Pete Nelson in March, the J&L presentation by Gary McCulloch in July, an overview of the Department of Environmental Conservation's conservation easement programs, and also the perspective from private landowners in December. The highlights also document the range of projects in regulatory programs that came before the board, the state land planning, other activity. So just to note, that board highlights that you received, that is a documentation of everything that's happened in this room. So just keep it in that perspective, that some of it is noted in the annual report, but that's the purpose of that. We use it often. Oh, what happened in 2014? Let's look back. What were we doing? When did we do this? So we find it to be an important chronology. Keep the point. It's not. What's that? Hit enter. Okay. It's not doing it. Well, there we go. Okay. So this is an overview slide. It gives you lots of numbers, and certainly the work that we do includes a lot of tracking of the activities that we have. The issuance of 252 permits, the 911 jurisdictional determinations, including 650 that were non-jurisdictional. The resolution on 141 enforcement cases in which environmental remediation was always the #1 priority. The 187 engineering site visits, the 75 economic meetings that we had throughout the region, They're responding to 197 land use planning inquiries, answering, and I love these figures, 3,671 telephone consultations and 132 walk-ins. Average that out by the week, and our staff in the JIF office, that's where those numbers are coming from. They're significant. They're a snapshot of work across the agency, and the report, certainly, there are other numbers throughout, the number of wetland site visits, air photo interpretations, deep hole test pits, et cetera. They're reflective of the volume that we experience here throughout a calendar year. And again, we're reporting to you on a calendar year here. In January, we started the year with Ariel Lynch presenting a project involving a new universally designed accessible campground, the Frontier Town Campground, Equestrian, and Day Use Center in the town of North Hudson, Essex County. The board unanimously approved the project, which establishes a gateway to the Adirondacks that will link local and regional outdoor recreation experiences in the Adirondack Park, bolster tourism, and strengthen the North Country's regional economy. We know that Phase 3 will get underway this spring based on, if you recall, just everything you did last month with the Phase 3 work where we issued the permit and variants related to the trails and the public viewing areas. We also learned last week that camping reservations are now available. So you can go to Reserve America and select a site here at the campground to visit. The photo on the right shows the wooden archway, the one below. That was... Yeah, well, I was just going to mention that. We've got Supervisor Randy Preston, and Supervisor Ron Moore, both of whom were so actively involved with this project there at the dedication ceremony this past fall, where they had horse and riders throughout. It was great. It was great. It was a good day. And what they did with that archway is just tremendous to see that on site. So it's open. It'll be available for visits. And in regulatory programs, we had public infrastructure and the expansion of emergency communications projects. In February, Tom Sayrig brought plans for the rebuild of the NYSEG transmission line. That's the photo on the left there. That's the transmission line going from Kent Falls substation to High Falls. Massive undertaking with NYSEG, and we were involved in the town of Saranac, Clinton County. The board unanimously approved that project, important infrastructure. In July, the photo on the right showing the Herkimer County Public Safety Communications, which was brought to us by Ariel, who presented the project. It's in the town of Webb, Herkimer County, and it involved construction of a new 90-foot tall self-supporting lattice tower on Macaulay Mountain, which was also unanimously approved by the board. Both of these projects are examples of the complex work that's undertaken by staff with project applicants to ensure that projects are improved in a manner which expands vital 21st century infrastructure and communication services without diminishing the park's unique natural resources and globally significant scenic appeal. So when you look through that record, there are approximately 15 variances, 814 orders, and projects that came before this board that you saw, that subset of the 252 that I mentioned earlier. And one of the exciting projects that we saw, and I know that we had permitted it the year prior, but the construction was largely undertaken in 2018, and that's the biomass facility. And what's really neat about this photo, when this was happening, I said to Keith, you've got to get out there and get a picture of this, because where the pine tree is there, you're seeing the crane, and that was the crane that lifted the housing shell that now houses the boiler units. So that was a work in progress. Now with everything done, the parking signs and the parking areas and the entrances and all of that, and the availability for public viewing, we obviously now have a complete biomass facility right outside our door. But this was underway, certainly providing renewable energy here to the agency, the state troopers, and to DEC. So one of the first of a state agency complex that has different agencies involved with a system like this. So I think that's what's really unique about that.
It's pretty operational, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So 3 months? Three for the last 3 months?
Yeah, starting the beginning of this year. Yep, yep. And from what, George O'Hare's been saying, we're drawing about 90% from it. We know that our system is adjusting to all of it, and we're working on that, but we're getting heat from it, which is...
There's still some final polishing to do, including some of the equipment connecting the boiler at the state police to the system, but our two agencies are getting heat, and then the final polishing of the education area is going to be improved a little bit. So it will be just a little bit longer before it's final, but by and large it's operating.
In December last year, Aaron Zeman presented the Lime Timber Project in the town of Tupper Lake, Franklin County, which involved a timber harvest on 643-acre portion of a 4,600-plus acre parcel in rural use and resource management lands. The board unanimously approved the project and demonstrated that the agency continues to build a successful track record in working with companies where since December 2013, in the approval of 24 forestry projects, 13 that came to the board for approval and 11 that were authorized under delegated authority. We've conducted 16 compliance visits to determine conformance with permit conditions and forestry plans, and we know that within the approximate 785,000 acres of working forest conservation easement lands in the park since 2013, the agency has issued timber harvest permits involving 0.8% of that acreage, so about 6,500 acres. It's a slide on the left showing the site, and the lower right is showing Aaron in the field. Working with our colleagues at the Olympic Regional Development Authority, the agency improved improvement projects for all of the ORTA facilities located within the park. The work that was here, there was so much of it in 2018. I mean, we got so accustomed to seeing ORTA staff here before us and having our staff engaged with them. The facilities inside the park included the Gore Mountain and Whiteface Mountain ski centers and the Mount Van Hovenberg Olympic Sports Complex. Improvements to these facilities will meet world-class standards required for housing upcoming national and international events. Considerable body of work there. Certainly, when we look at 2018, a highlight of state land work was the February, and it was early February, very first 2 days actually, the completion of the 2016-17 state land classification package. In March, Governor Cuomo approved the historically significant action which involved lands in all 12 Adirondack Park counties and more than 50,000 acres, including the 20,543 acres that made up the Boreas Ponds tract. Where did we get this picture, Keith? Nature Conservancy. It's stunning, isn't it? And as Governor Cuomo noted in his correspondence regarding the action, and this is a quotation from the letter we received, that the action provides tremendous recreational opportunities to both the residents and visitors to the park, and continues to fulfill the vision of those who have had the foresight to adopt the Forever Wild provision in New York State's Constitution over 100 years ago. Together, we have furthered the wildland legacy so important to the people of New York State. Congratulations. We know that the classification action resulted in the High Peaks area becoming a wilderness area with more than 270,000 acres in the heart of the Adirondacks. And our map, which was newly printed again in 2018, which is behind the flag there, shows that amazing green swath of wilderness on it. In other business, and beginning in March of last year and then concluding in December, we had a board recommendation to Governor Cuomo to amend the Adirondack Park State Land Master Plan's travel corridors definition and corresponding guidelines for management and use. Our action allows for both rail and trail use in the Remsen Lake Placid travel corridor and future travel corridors that are required by the state. We had a number of unit management plans in 2018, and they're all listed here. We know that in addition to the classification action and the slump amendment that I just talked about, there were many unit management plans completed, and we know that there was the enormous work completed by DEC and agency staff in the amendments to the High Peaks Wilderness Complex and the Vanderwacker Wild Forest UMPs, which were both approved for slump conformance in July. So overall, throughout the year, this board determined that 9 UMPs were in conformance with the slump, and they're all listed here. Like I said, it's a considerable body of work. In 2018, planning staff met with 57 of the 101 Adirondack Park towns and villages. Interactions included town meetings, training, comprehensive planning, zoning consultations, and local government day. Staff also worked with the town of Duane. We've got that map up there in relation to the land use plan, in review of the development potential for the town's private lands as currently classified. Staff created a series of land use and resource limitation maps, and they met with the town board to discuss the map amendment process. Staff also worked with the town of Westport, which is the lower slide on the right, in their preparation of a proposed map amendment, which has gone out for public comment with further action anticipated this year. We know that when our staff met in Duane, the town members were very appreciative. These are some photos from local government services and local government day. We had the 21st, those numbers are certainly getting up there, the 21st annual event in April 2018 in Lake Placid with more than 360 people in attendance representing 114 towns, villages, and organizations. The conference focused on economic development strategies and the promotion of projects that benefit rural economies in regards to improved infrastructure, entrepreneurial initiatives, municipal energy management, and the control of invasive species. The local government award was presented to biathlete Tim Burke last year in honor of all Adirondack Park Olympians. And it's great to see that photo because you see him in the middle there with the award. We also, at the event, honored Supervisor George Cannon. Where in the reception, we raised our glasses in honor of his life, and Mrs. Cannon was in attendance, to which we are so appreciative. She's in the right picture there. With Fred Monroe, which would also, we saw another milestone in 2018, with Fred retiring from the Local Government Review Board and Jerry Delaney joining us here. So those are some photos just showing that activity. In terms of our economic services in 2018, the agency piloted its Envision Adirondacks initiative, which worked with local community stakeholders to envision new development by providing visual simulations of diverse development scenarios. We did that in the towns of Johnsburg and North Elba, as well as in the village of Lake Placid. That street rendering was from Lake Placid. The other two photos were the Economic Affairs Committee having had hosted two presentations, informational with Tom Williams regarding the Adirondack Watershed Institute, invasive species, business community outreach program on the upper left there, and on the right side there, Jay Ward and his daughter, who had come and spoken to us about their operation with Ward Lumber in
Eric Coleman, you'll never hear it again.
Oh, yeah, Eric Homling, all the way on the left, certainly, because it was commending the work of the Adirondack Watershed Institute. Staff attended 75 public outreach meetings, as I said earlier, work group and community development meetings. We worked in the town of Crown Point on their comprehensive plan, the town of Schroon Lake on their local waterfront revitalization plan, and the town of Chester on their economic development planning. And we also, you're seeing staff throughout too, so I think in terms of Dan being in, Kelleher being in that slide too. The legal division, we're giving you some indications from our website here, but I wanted to note that in 2018, our jurisdictional office continued what I view as an Olympic pace, responding to over 900 jurisdictional inquiries that I mentioned earlier that were in addition to written correspondence, which involved close to the 4,000 telephone and walk-in meetings. Staff also conducted outreach to help inform the public. We find this really beneficial to talk with the public on APA jurisdiction, and that photo below is showing Doug Miller presenting at Local Government Day with Ariel Lynch and Devin Korn on site plan review and project application preparation. We know that in the year, enforcement staff continue to focus on promptly addressing violations in a fair and consistent manner. They opened 188 cases in the year, conducted 148 site visits, achieved volunteer compliance on 44 cases, closed 44 through settlement agreements, and after investigation found that 97 were not violations. So again, some metrics to give you an idea of where our staff are working. Major activities that do not show up as a number per se, but which are included and which are so strong in terms of the work that was done in 2018 in terms of our interdivisional work within the agency with the tremendous support of the legal division include the development of the new application and process for large-scale subdivision review, the new material that we put together for new variance application documents and guidance. And here on the left, we're showing you the material that is on the web that allows you to go in to view the large-scale subdivision material that we have. We're very pleased that we were able to develop the new application, which allows for conceptual review and public input prior to project completion. We saw in 2018 the first time use in the Woodward Lake subdivision proposal, and those communications are in that site that I'm showing you here that you can link to. The comment letters received, the correspondence, the follow-up. Some letters have come in after the comment period, and we've noted that. The information that's available certainly makes clear that the project is still in conceptual design and that additional work will be forthcoming from the applicant, and we look forward to that. The slide on the right is showcasing all the work that we did with the changes to the variance application and the appendices that are corresponding to the type of work that's being proposed. And as of this past week, Molly was so helpful with separating that out that when you go to our website now, you just see that section under forms and applications, and variance just comes up on its own. So I encourage you to look at that. There was a tremendous amount of work that took place there. The Resource Analysis and Scientific Services Unit, as we know, is responsible for providing scientific and engineering services to agency staff. All agency transactions that involve wetlands, soils, wastewater treatment, invasive species, stormwater, surface water, and our forests are analyzed by RAS for natural resource protection recommendations. The staff outreach is considerable. We see hundreds of on-site wastewater system reviews and hundreds of stormwater management reviews and shoreline and variance proposal reviews, and we've broken out those numbers in the report. We know that in terms of wetland site visits, we did 209. in 2018 to determine the evidence of and/or to delineate wetland boundaries for property owners. Staff also completed 361 wetland air photo interpretations. The interpretations of the deep hole soil test pits provide, as we know, the necessary information to correctly site an on-site wastewater treatment system, and it's something that's so important whenever we're doing subdivisions and we look at. And the fact that a total of 81 projects were examined involving 159 deep hole test pits that were reviewed by agency staff is considerable. The bottom right shows Aaron and Sarah Staub out doing a deep hole test pit, Mary Odell in the field, Sean Lalonde at a variance site, and Aaron Zeman measuring the diameter of a stump as part of project compliance for a forest treatment project. We also know that in 2018, staff worked with the Adirondack Park Invasive Plant Program in the development of a citizen scientist monitoring tracker, and the survey gives lake associations the ability to independently track the progress of aquatic invasives and the management efforts over time. And I'm noting today that we're going to hear that presentation from Lee Woolworth next month. So it will be part of what we'll be doing next month. We're going to have a number of discussions on park ecology and water and invasives. So, during 2018, the agency continued a robust public outreach program, which included efforts from staff across all divisions, again to local government officials, lakeshore owner associations, chambers of commerce, real estate organizations, academic institutions, and international delegations. Annually, we've been involved with the Cornell and Syracuse University Humphrey Fellowship Program, and every Columbus Day weekend they have an itinerary here in the Adirondacks. Over the years, people from over 100 countries have visited, have learned about what we're doing, and really allow for an international face and exposure for what we're doing here in the park. And it certainly is appreciated that they come and that we're able to talk with them. And these are a number of photos. That was one where Keith was with Supervisor Moore and Jack Drury at Paul Smith's College, hosted by Eric Holmlin. And we've got some of the delegation there that have visited with us over time. So, always a favorite yearly event is the induction of a distinguished person who made a profound impact in the Adirondack Park, and to induct them into our Forest of Heroes. Each year we've dedicated a native tree into the Arboretum to commemorate contributions to the agency and the park. And in 2018, we had the distinct honor to celebrate the life of John Collins, Jr. Mrs. Collins and her son-in-law, Peter Bauer, joined Chairman Craig here to dedicate a hemlock. Mr. Collins was appointed to the Adirondack Park Agency Board by Governor Mario Cuomo and served from 1984 to 1995, including as chairman from 1992 to 1995. He was a lifelong conservationist who profoundly cared about the preservation of the forest preserve and the well-being of park communities. So that's a photo showing the gathering, and the other one is showing the map, which notes all the people that have been inducted into the Arboretum. Here's a transition page, and this acknowledges some changes that we've had here in 2018, and acknowledges the outstanding contributions of our staff and board members who completed their official service last year. A constant in life is change, and the agency is certainly not exempt. We will miss Chairman Sherman Craig and board member Barb Rice. Mr. Craig was first appointed to the board in 2011 and was designated chairman in 2016 by Governor Andrew Cuomo. He led the agency through the complex classification package with a leadership style driven by his boundless enthusiasm for the park's wild places, communities, and citizens. Board member Barb Rice was an active supporter in addressing the needs of local governments and businesses, and during their tenure, obviously much was accomplished, and we thank them for their dedication. Staff transitions that continued during 2018 with the retirement of long-serving employees, new hires, and staff assignments. There was a combined 137 years of public service that concluded with the retirements of Suzanne McSherry, John Barge, Ed Sneesick, Steve Brewer, and James Townsend. We applaud them today for their significant contributions and wish them continued success. And I believe they're all up there in some way or another in those photos, and some of them are with their spouses. Additionally, we were pleased to welcome Matthew Brown and Molly Jordan. Matt was hired as an EPS 1 and Molly as a mapping technologist 1. They both hit the ground running and are great additions to the agency. In October, Kathy Regan transitioned into her new role as Supervisor of Natural Resource Analysis and Scientific Services, and Rick Weber began serving as the Deputy Director of Planning in March. So those are certainly some changes. Here I'm going to just talk a little bit about the planning that we did in 2018, that throughout the fall of 2018, we began a project that's extending into this year, and I'd like to highlight some of the work that's been underway. This has included the development of a plan with the identification for 4 strategic goals with corresponding 3 strategies that focus on the delivery of services to customers that are impactful, that are measurable, and achievable. We began this work in late summer. In our work, we set 4 goals related to regulatory processes, wetland identification, and complex planning, and an area on staffing, which addressed the transitions that I just addressed. In our work, we prioritized a specific strategy and regulatory programs for more timely and efficient regulatory determinations that continue to provide necessary resource protection. You're going to hear more about this goal throughout this year, and that we're doing more work in this area. As we did the early planning with assistance from Rick Weber and Paul Van Cott, who were really instrumental in bringing people together and talking about these ideas, we gathered ideas from all staff that are involved in regulatory processes. We used what we called an appreciative inquiry approach to organizational change, recognizing that appreciative inquiry as an approach focuses on what is right within the work environment, and it's an examination of work processes, and that these efforts provided an opportunity to work with staff to examine the agency's core strengths. Again, what are we doing right, and how do we continue to improve on that while engaging a whole systems approach? We posed a number of questions to staff, starting with what works well. That was a great way to start, as opposed to, God, where are we not getting there? What works well? Really powerful. And these questions we spent some time with. What would be the ideal process for what we're doing? What specific ideas do you have for ways to improve our permit application review and decision process? What are all the ways we can improve our permit applications, and what are all the ways we can streamline our permits? And staff in regulatory programs, enforcement, RAS, and legal all had the opportunity to engage with Rick and Paul on those questions, and we had lots of really, really good dialogue. Out of those discussions, we identified 3 strategies. One, to look at the delegation and issuance of minor projects and general permits. That's a subject that's going to be on the agenda today, so it's something that we came out of the gate with and are making real strides with. The second is to improve the application process and site visits, and the third is to improve the permits. The second two, the application process and the improvement of permits, we have staff working on in staff teams at this point, which allows me to delve into a little bit with you of what the work activities and next steps are. The first one, I said the delegation, we're already bringing you material today. The second one, in terms of our application process, our target goal is to conduct site visits before sending out NIPAs. We're looking at a modification of our applications, what it is that we need to say, and we're working through a multidisciplinary staff team. The third item, using shorter permits with analysis documented in the file. We're looking at the potential to modify the permit templates, improve the documentation, and we're doing that again through a multidisciplinary staff team. And by multidisciplinary, I'm referring to the fact that we're bringing in staff from all the divisions to brainstorm and to look at our processes, and again, working from that, what works well, what are our strengths, how do we improve that model of appreciative inquiry. In conclusion, I'm putting up some spring photos to recognize that it will be coming at some point. And I'd also like to say that there's a tremendous amount of momentum throughout the agency in building on the strategies that I've just talked about. We anticipate that as we complete the work in regulatory programs, we'll be also looking at the other goals we identified regarding wetlands and complex planning, in both for private and state lands, and the agency staffing. Please note that when we talk about this planning, it's almost that big add-on of what we're doing, that big umbrella, because it's being done in addition to the day-to-day work that we have, that you saw before you, with projects that I've talked about today and the metrics and the annual report that you have. With Rick Weber now firmly planted in the planning division, I have been working closely with regulatory program staff. With Colleen Parker and John Berth, we've been tending to the work that's generated, which is always considerable, and with much appreciation to regulatory program staff for all they do and what they'll continue to do. Thank you again to Rick for all he's done in allowing for a smooth transition. We've been changing letters and putting my signature on it, project notice forms, all of that is happening in terms of me working with them closely. The mailing included documentation of project activity through the end of February, and as I mentioned last month, we're pleased that our new counsel, Chris Cooper, will be joining us on March 25th. So, talking about staffing, I just want to segue quickly here and say that today I'm also pleased to announce the appointment of another staff member who I think is there. Mary Odell to the position of Biologist 2, Ecology. She assumed her new position on March 7th. She's been with the agency since June 2005 as a Biologist 1. She came to the position with a BS in Environmental and Forest Biology from SUNY ESF. Her past 13 years at the agency have provided her with the skills for this new position, and we welcome her continued contributions with the state of New York and the agency. Please join me in welcoming her today. We're good. I realize I thought many times today that I needed another pin for Mary. I don't know if you received one in 2005.
I still have one.
You still have it? Okay, because I was like messaging people, like, where's the pin? Well,
I have a pin.
anyway. Congratulations. And we had one of those. We had one of them. We're also taking steps to fill vacancies in the agency, including the Deputy Director of Regulatory Programs and the Biologist 1 position. In closing, I believe the agency is well positioned to continue our work in 2019. There's tremendous enthusiasm and opportunity before us. Change offers us new ways of doing things while building on the strengths of our previous successes. I would like to end by thanking all of you on the board for your contributions, and to our acting chair, Karen Feldman, for your ongoing assistance. Together, we share in a monumental task of the protection of the public and private lands of the Adirondack Park. I think we do it very well together. And certainly, many thank yous to all the staff for everything that they do in regards to the agency's accomplishments. Let's give them a round of applause for their work. we're on to 2019, unless you have any questions.
Anybody? Comments, questions for Terry? Well, Terry, you've thanked everybody, so I think the least we can do is thank you for your leadership in putting all of this together. This is a lot of work, and to thank management as well as all of our staff for just jumping into everything and really moving things forward. I mean, I feel the energy too when I walk in here, but thank you for your leadership, and really, I think all of us are looking forward to 2019 and beyond. We have a lot to do. I think all of us are eager to get on with it, and let's continue the progress that we've been making. So I thank all of you for thinking outside the box and taking on the challenge and being willing to do this. We certainly couldn't do it without you, and it's really a lot of fun to work with all of you and learn so much. And I hope the board feels the same way. So thank you very much for all you've done.
Thank you.
That's a lot of work. Oh, Keith, you're hiding back there. Thank you for all that you do as well. So we really appreciate it. I think you're the person who really puts a lot of this together, correct? Thank you. All right, now to business. Can I have a motion to adjourn into committees, please? John?
All set.
Dan, second? All those in favor? All right, let's start into committees. Dan, regs?
Regulatory programs will come to order. I'll ask for a motion to approve the draft committee minutes from the February 2019 meeting. Moved by John, second. Second by Art. Committee in favor? Opposed? Good. I'd just like to mention also that
Before we approve them, just for the record, on the first page of the minutes, Jerry is, should be noted instead of Fred. We love Fred being here, but...
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Thanks, Art.
Just to make sure that people know I'm reading the stuff, okay?
Impressive.
We are too.
Any other comments or changes? Motion to accept with this change?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? I'd like to mention also that the committee is myself, John Ernst, Art Lucy, and today Matt is filling in for Lynn. So, Terry touched on the point that the monthly report is in our packet. Thank you, Terry. And we'll move into item number 2. Paul Van Cott's going to talk to us on delegation of authority.
Great,
Thank you, Paul.
great. Good afternoon.
know he's up
Oh, yeah. Terry's a harsh taskmaster. Be there. Okay, so we're going to talk, we talked a little bit about delegation last month. We did an interim fix by a memo, and we're going to be talking about proposed changes to the official delegation resolution of the agency. It's on our website and that you have a copy of, and this is really where all the delegations are formalized. As Terry mentioned, we've been working on our strategic planning. I was fortunate to be part of the meetings along with Rick Weber where we met with all the staff. What Terry didn't mention is that when we asked that first question of staff, what works well, they were shocked. They didn't come into the meeting for that. They all had their ideas that they wanted to get out there. But to ask them to really drill down and think about what is it that you do individually, what are the projects that you've experienced, what are the things that have worked well and why. That was a really good conversation, and I think it was very helpful to generating all the many ideas that staff came up with during those sessions. And what you see in the strategies that Terry outlined, those all came from our line staff, our people who are on the ground, dealing with the public, dealing with the resources every day, thinking about ways that we can do our job in a more timely manner, but also thinking about how we can do a better job of protecting the resources of the park. So those are the ideas that have come through and are going to carry through these strategic planning work that Terry mentioned. So today we're talking about one of those strategies for our regulatory process, which is delegating the issuance of minor project and general permits. And in order to do this, we need to modify our agency delegation resolution. Question, why should we delegate? Well, we have the DDRP, the Deputy Director for Regulatory Programs, who is responsible for reviewing and issuing all notices and permits for an average of 250 projects a year. Sharing some of this workload with the middle managers not only can improve the timeliness of our regulatory process, but it can let the DDRP focus on more complex projects. And the position's role as part of the agency's staff executive team. You got to keep in mind the deputy director, along with the deputy director of planning, they're the other highest positions in the agency. And so we need that person to be able to participate in policy planning, regulatory reform, and just basic management of the agency's work. The other thing that these delegations or delegation can do is it trains the next generation of leaders within our agency. You know, we have two amazing EPS3s in Colleen Parker and John Berth, and empowering them and letting them learn how to do this work and to manage some of this work brings them along, so that in terms of the continuity and succession that Terry was talking about, you know, we have the next generation of leaders within our building. So with the addition of John Berth as the second EPS3, we really are presented with an opportunity to look at sharing some of the DDRP's workload. We're talking about minor projects. Minor projects, as you all know, are two-lot subdivisions and single-family dwellings that require a permit. That's defined by our statute. These projects comprise approximately 50% of the permits issued by the agency each year. Generally, their impacts are more limited. The needs, you know, when we get the application in, there's less that we generally need in order to reach completion of the application, and the permits themselves are less complicated. Finally, with respect to minor projects, both the APA Act and our rules contemplate expedited processing for minor projects, which are typically the projects that our neighbors are trying to accomplish, where they're trying to build their first home, or they're trying to sell off a lot so that they can pay for their children's college. So the APA Act really kind of already captured this idea that these projects need to be treated a little more expeditiously. General permits have been, as you know, they've been issued by the board. You know, the conditions and the details of what the permitted activity is already in a permit that's filed in each and every county of the park. The whole purpose of general permits was so that applicants could come in with a very defined and limited amount of information and essentially be given a fairly non-discretionary certificate to move forward with their project. So again, these are not the complex large-scale subdivisions that we would always want to make sure that the Deputy Director of Regulatory Programs is involved in. So beyond minor projects and general permits, what we are proposing in this delegation as part of your mailing package is to allow EPS 3 positions issue notices of incompletion and completion, allow EPS 3 positions to issue permits for projects that are not minor projects if both the executive director and the deputy director are absent or unavailable. And then we also have 2 very capable EPS 2s in regulatory programs, and Ariel Lynch and Tom Seri. And this other delegation would allow them to issue notices of incompletion and completion if everybody else is out of the building. These are all things that in other delegations that have occurred over the years, interim type delegations that are already authorized by the agency. So really what we're doing is trying to clarify them so they correspond to the appropriate titles, and then to bring them in so they're all, once again, in the delegation resolution that is the agency's primary way of making these delegations. So the specific language, and it is in your package attached to the memorandum that I had for Terry, the specific language, this is the excerpt from the regulatory, or the Deputy Director of Regulatory Programs delegation in the delegation resolution, and it would provide that with the consent of the so with the consent of the executive director and subject to our regulations, which provide the procedures for all our permitting, and the supervisory director from the Deputy Director of Regulatory Programs can authorize staff in the EPS 3 positions to sign and issue notices of completion and incompletion, general permits, and permits for minor projects. Those same staff to sign and issue other permits when the ED and the Deputy Director are absent or unavailable. And then the staff in the Environmental Program Specialist 2 titles to sign and issue notices of completion and incompletion when all of the other people are out of the building. So in order to accomplish this delegation, as I explained in the memo, the APA board has full and broad legal authority to make this delegation, but in order to do it, it does require a modification of the resolution for delegations. And that proposed modification can be adopted by a resolution of the agency board upon a recommendation from the Regulatory Programs Committee. So the staff request and recommendation for the Regulatory Programs Committee is to move this matter to the full board with a recommendation that the board adopt the proposed modification to the delegation resolution.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions?
I just have a comment that I think that we're all about trying to make governmental process a little more user-friendly and streamlined, and obviously environmental resources are paramount, but this is an example where we're delegating to staff issues that are not substantive, and I think that it's a very thoughtful move, and I think it's about efficiency, and it's a time that's appropriate.
Karen?
Thank you. At the same time, Paul, none of this happens without the executive director and the deputy director being aware of whatever consents or NIPAs have to be issued, correct? So it's not as though you've got somebody on their own out there just signing things. It's always with the knowledge and consent and approval of people above them, correct?
Yes, that may be, it could be that the deputy director designates one of the EPS 3 positions to be the primary person for minor projects. And then that EPS 3 would be basically managing those projects as they move through the regulatory process. But the deputy director would always be responsible for everything that goes out the building, and all of this would be done with subject to supervisory guidance. So, I mean, it's really, what this really does, and it is, I think it is it's a real opportunity and an appropriate step for the agency, is it allows our senior-most managers to actually manage their programs and to use their staff in a much more effective way that I believe will not only improve timeliness, but will also contribute to overall improvement of the work that we do and our protection of resources.
Matt? One second. Matt, go ahead.
Thanks.
Terry.
I would like to echo Art's statements. I'd also like to say that I think it's really important to bring staff along. I think that was an excellent point that you made. You have the future leaders of this agency in the room now, that you should be bringing them along to have them ready to go when the time comes. The other note that you made, and the question that I have that follows, you made the point that you believe this is going to save a lot of time for the person out there in the world, our constituency. Did you estimate how much time you thought that would save doing this?
One of the things, as Terry mentioned in her remarks, is that the strategies that we've developed or are working on, they need to be measurable. And there is an easy way that we can measure the success of what we do with regard to the issuance of permits. When an application is complete, we enter that date into our digital system here. And so we can tell from that date until the day that a permit is issued how long it's taken. So, for example, for 2017, for minor projects, the average time that it took from application completion to permit issuance was 35 days. So I can't tell you at this point how much we think we can shave off. I will say that when we were in some of our staff meetings, the suggestion was made, we should be able to get minor project permits out the door 15 days after completion. So let's have that as a challenge. And if you were an applicant and that was the kind of turnaround that you got, I think you'd be feeling really good about the work that the agency's doing.
Thank you, Paul. Jerry?
So I'm going to echo what Art and Matt have said, and it's really good that the employees are able to step up to the plate, learn the different processes, especially as you try to promote from within, because they have the institutional knowledge. My only concern here is the process of documenting why an ES2 may have signed something, because at some time I see a conflict over a permit or an incompletion or a completion that somebody brings up a question as to why that particular person had signed it. And I think it would be helpful if there was some documenting process as to why that person signed it, that there was indeed all these steps had been met. I know you're saying it's going to be supervisory approval over that person, but some form of documentation when somebody actually came out and complained that they didn't think that person should have signed it, and then you can just show that all the steps had been there and that you followed your steps.
It's a valid point, and I think, you know, we have internal controls across all of our processes within the agency, and you know, those come with or are developed as a result of delegations like this one. So I'm sure that, you know, that point will be taken into account by Terry and the Deputy Director of Regulatory Programs, because it does make sense. We want to be accountable for how decisions are made and who's, you know, regardless of who's making those decisions.
Anyone else? Can we move this as a motion to adopt the proposed modifications?
I'll move it.
Moved by Art.
I'll second.
All right.
Matt.
Second by Matt. Committee, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Very good. The next item under regulatory programs is a project P2007-11RS. David Nenny, it's a project involves a third renewal permit for construction of a single-family dwelling on a lot created by a subdivision involving wetlands. And Trevor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm presenting agency permit P2007-11R3, which is a third renewal for a single-family dwelling in the town of Broad Alban, Fulton County. Pursuant to Section 572.20 of Agency Rules and Regulations, requests for renewals of permits which have previously been renewed shall be referred to the Regulatory Programs Committee. This project was originally permitted in 2007, first renewed in 2011, and then once again in 2015. David J. Nenny is the applicant and also the landowner, and he's owned the property since 2005. The second renewal was properly recorded in the Fulton County Clerk's office, and the project has not been undertaken. Therefore, Mr. Nenny has requested a third renewal. He is not proposing any changes to the original proposal, and he wishes to get the project renewed and then sell the property. Before we begin, I'd like to give you an overview of what we will cover. We'll go over the jurisdiction over the project, conclusions of law, project location, existing conditions, proposed project, public comment review by others, staff recommendation, and then any questions that you may have. The agency's jurisdiction over this project is from Settlement Agreement E 2006-260, which resolved a two-lot subdivision involving wetlands undertaken in 2005 without a permit. Under terms of the settlement, the subject parcel is authorized as a lawful lot, and an agency permit is required prior to undertaking any new land use and development on the subject parcel. These are the conclusions of law stated in the draft permit that the agency needs to reach in order to approve the project. The agency must find that the development authorized in the permit is consistent with the land use and development plan, compatible with character description and purposes, consistent with the overall intensity guidelines, complies with the shoreline restrictions, does not cause undue adverse impact on resources of the park, and secures the natural benefits of wetlands and results in minimal degradation to said wetlands. Now we'll move on to the project location. At the park-wide scale, the project is located in the town of Broad Alban, near the southern border of the Adirondack Park in Fulton County. Zooming in to the regional scale, we can see that the project site is located south of the Great Sacandaga Lake and easterly of the village of Broad Alban. The 4.4 acre parcel contains lands classified as both moderate intensity use and rural use, with approximately 2.8 acres in moderate and 1.6 in rural. This is a 2017 air photo showing the surrounding area, which is primarily characterized by rural residential development. The property is vacant and mostly wooded with coniferous species such as white cedar, red spruce, and hemlock. As you can see, part of a large shrub swamp emergent marsh wetlands complex with a value rating of 2 runs right through the middle of the property. Access to the project site is from James Drive, which is a town-maintained cul-de-sac. And this would be the rural use portion of the property and the moderate intensity use out front. And also as part of the settlement agreement, there were no building rights awarded to the rural use portion and 2 building rights to the moderate. And as you can see, any development on the rural would require crossing wetlands. So all potential development was relegated to the moderate intensity use portion. Here is an additional air photo showing a bird's eye view of the project site looking from the west. This portion of the property, and here where the cursor is located between the road and the wetland, is where development is proposed. And you will see a site plan in a future slide. Again, the property is located at the very end of James Drive, and this is a residential subdivision, about 10 houses in here, or actually this would be the 10th house in the subdivision. This picture is taken from the intersection of James Road and Union Mills Road, looking south towards the project site, which is located at the end of the road. You can see the entrance sign to the Deer Haven Estates residential development, to which this project site is part of. And several houses along the easterly side of the James Drive are quite visible from the intersection. The next few pictures are taken from the end of James Drive. In this photo, I am standing with my back to the project site, looking easterly at the houses across the street. As you can see, several of them are visible from the project site. Continuing in a clockwise direction, the right side of this picture is the beginning of the project site. The property line between the subject parcel and the nearest neighbor to the east runs approximately right through here to the south. In this photo, you can see there's some clearing here. This is part of the wetland that runs across the project site. And in this portion of the wetland, the way the property is there's very little room between the end of the road and the wetland. So development is proposed to occur on the westerly side of the parcel, where there's more room between the end of the road and the wetland. And this photograph is showing a vegetated buffer which would remain between the wetland and the area of proposed development. And now this photo is approximately where the driveway would be located to provide access to the building location. And continuing around, starting to look back up the road towards the intersection now, this is the beginning of the nearest neighbor. And this house is about 50 feet off the property line. So it is very near the property line. Now continuing around in our clockwise direction, this is just a better view of the neighboring property. And we've completed a full transect now, and we're back looking across to the east. As shown on the site plan, the applicant proposes a 3-bedroom, single-family dwelling, which is located here, with an attached garage, with a combined footprint of 2,668 square feet and a maximum height of 38 feet. The proposed development will be located entirely on the moderate intensity use. As you can see, this is just a partial survey of the property. Here's the boundary line between moderate intensity and rural use. Within the proposed limits of clearing, the limits of clearing are this squiggly line here located around the driveway in the proposed development. And it will also be in excess of 100 feet from the wetland. The nearest boundary of the wetland has been flagged in the field, and the limits of clearing are proposed to be at least 100 feet away, and therefore the septic system and the actual development would be greater than within 100 feet from the wetlands. A 12-foot wide driveway is proposed to provide access to the building location. It'll be a new driveway off the side of James Drive. And the dwelling will be served by an on-site wastewater treatment system located here and a well up in the corner. Utilities are proposed to be buried along the driveway from existing overhead utilities available at the end of James Drive. And on the site plan, you can also see the nearest neighboring house. The proposed house is about 180 feet back off the road. So of the houses in the subdivision, this would be the furthest away. Shown here is the previously approved septic plan for the proposed development. This plan was reviewed and approved by agency engineering staff as a part of the current renewal. The applicant does not propose any changes, and agency staff approved it as previously approved. And the proposed shallow absorption trench system is designed for a dwelling that includes no more than 3 bedrooms. No public comment was received, and I did speak to the town of Broad Alban code enforcement officer. He said that a permit is required from the town, and none has been applied for at this time. Staff recommend that the proposed project be approved with conditions. The proposed single-family dwelling with related development meets all required conclusions of law. The project entirely avoids impacts to wetlands, and the development will be located greater than 100 feet from all wetland boundaries. As part of the settlement, there were 2 principal building rights awarded to the moderate intensity use portion. There are currently no buildings on the property, so it does meet the intensity guidelines. There's no shoreline. It's certainly well off the road. Vegetation is going to be retained between the road and the development, and with the major concern being wetlands. Staff recommend the draft permit conditions contained in the draft permit which you have. Clearing for the building site and associated development shall be limited to the area shown on the site plan. The proposed septic shall be constructed in the location and design shown on the site and septic plans. Silt fence shall be properly installed and maintained between the construction area and wetland as indicated on the site plan. And any further subdivision or construction of additional principal buildings shall require a new agency permit. That's,
Thank you, Jeff.
happy to take any questions you may have.
Any questions? Art?
You mentioned a couple of times about there's 2 building rights.
Correct.
Can you bring the site plan back up? Yeah, but they can't get there. I know, so where's the... So where's the second building right going?
It awarded 2 principal building rights by mathematically, and makes no promises that, the settlement agreement is based on existing environmental conditions. It may not be possible to utilize them both on site.
So I think it's important to remember what building rights are and what they mean. I mean, this could be, if they put a second kitchen into this house, that would most likely be considered a second dwelling unit and therefore a second building right within this house. Also, building rights can be transferred between properties. So, it's pretty tight in that moderate intensity use portion. Arguable whether someone could construct a separate house, but that doesn't mean that, I'm assuming that when the settlement was signed, we did the mathematical calculation for what was allowed there. It doesn't mean 2 houses there. There's other things that could happen.
Condition 13 covers that contingency.
Yeah, I understand the condition 13, but it says there's no more than 2, but I don't understand how you can put another one there on the moderate intensity portion of the parcel.
By math, the property is allowed 2 principal building rights, but a permit would be required to use them, and certainly I agree it is a very tight building location.
So like an example of how 2 building rights could be on that property is turning that house into essentially a 2-kitchen, 2-bathroom house.
But we say that the septic system is only provable for a 3-bedroom house right now, so if you added a kitchen, it would no longer meet it.
I'm not sure that would affect the septic.
It's a number of bedrooms,
Additional
isn't it,
kitchen?
that-
It's not impossible to use a second building right on that property. It's also valuable potentially for transfer, so we can't
Like,
just
when you say
extinguish them.
transfer, what does that mean? To an area lot?
Under the current law, it would have to go to a neighboring moderate intensity use property, but it could be done. It does have financial value in that way.
Okay. My second question has to do with in the number of years that have transpired since we issued the original permit, have we gained experience in septic systems to know that what they've proposed is the most and best possible system?
As part of this review, I did have agency engineering staff take a look at the previously approved plans, and they did, they approved them once again with the caveat that it's no more than a 3-bedroom.
I appreciate that, but I'm just saying that it seems like in my tenure here that we've learned a lot about septic systems, and it just seems like it's like building efficiency. We've learned that we should, insulate our houses more, use windows that are more energy efficient. And so I'm just saying this is an opportunity to say, hey, there's a modern absorption fields that work better than this 8-year-old one that was proposed. It's just a question. I understand this met our approval 8 years ago.
It does comply with current standards, and it is a shell absorption trench system due to the presence of high seasonal groundwater.
It's a fairly modern design, I do believe, yeah.
Okay.
And Mr. Lucy, condition 7 in the permit actually, I think, addresses your other concern. A second principal building couldn't be constructed on the property without prior agency review and authorization. So even though there may be 2 building rights allocated there, this permit doesn't automatically give carte blanche to go ahead and construct a second one. They'd have to come back for condition 7.
And the settlement agreement, when it does resolve, it says that 2 principal building rights are awarded strictly based upon math, and says that the agency makes no guarantee that the maximum allowable under the law can actually be approved on the ground.
I'm fine.
Okay. Anyone else?
So just one practical question. This is the 3rd renewal. It just, the permit was issued and there was just a delay. The recipient just wasn't ready to build and that happened again.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay.
I may have spoken to him, and yes, and at this point he says he contacted us. So the 2nd renewal was filed on time. It's the permit is legally binding, and it's still good until the middle of May. So he wants to get it renewed before it expires, and his intention is to sell the property. And he thinks that having an existing permit on there will make the property more sellable.
Okay, so that's the idea.
Person. Right. Otherwise, he's proposing through all 3 renewals now. He's proposed no changes whatsoever from the original permit.
Thank you.
Karen?
Quick question. Trevor, on this, is that the wastewater treatment system next to the house on the left?
Yes,
okay.
in this neighborhood, yep.
What's the distance to the moderate intensity use line? The rural line? In other words, where the wetlands are? You have it, what's that distance?
Well, the wetlands are 100 feet.
Okay.
I mean, he's got and this is from as part of the site plan the surveyor picked up our wetland flags and shows that the actual limits of clearing closest to the wetlands are 100 feet away. And so the septic and proposed development are further away than that.
You may not know the answer to this, but has there ever been an issue in terms of with that wetland with intense storms? I mean, is there any flooding that's gone on there that would go into that yard or any of those backyards, any of that area? Has there ever been an issue?
I do not have that information, historical information.
I mean, that would be my concern, is just what is the likelihood of something like that happening? So,
right. From what I saw as you see, I was out there in February. It's the only time I've been on the properties and under frozen conditions, but given the distance that the wetland is, and this is all forested through here with, spruce, hemlock, cedar. So I would think it'd have to be extreme situation for water to get that far. No,
I hope they're giving consideration to it. It's just something I think we have to think about these days. So.
And he certainly can't get any farther away to get from the wetland.
Elevation? Yeah, I mean, that's just a concern that I would have, and I hope they have the same concern and consider that when they're doing
Jerry?
this.
Karen, I can sort of answer your concerns there because part of the deep hole test is supposed to tell where the water table comes up and down on. So a shallow trench system wouldn't have been permittable there without raising the elevation of the ground so that you would have enough distance between the known water table and the top of the trench, the top of the ground, so there's proper absorption. So that history would tell you in the ground perhaps that no, there's not a problem.
No one else? I would just like to see the addition of how do we do it, the best practice to prevent the introduction of invasive species under construction like we've been doing lately on other projects, especially because of the location to the wetland.
That condition is in there.
Oh, it is in there?
Condition 11.
Yeah, sorry.
It should be.
17.
Okay, all right, good. Sorry about that. Any other,
While we're beating this up to death, I'm gonna, and it is a 3rd renewal, so it really should be kind of perfunctory administrative, but do you have any idea what substantially commenced means? Like, to make this lot more saleable, if he had cleared the lot for development, would we consider that substantially commenced? So that he doesn't have to keep coming back is where I'm coming from.
Right, no, I do understand your question. Yes.
We define what
Right,
that
we
is, permit by permit.
In existence, right. So I've carried through the same condition as, or the same definition of substantially commenced as existed in the prior permits, which was the agency will consider the project in existence when the foundation for the single-family dwelling is installed, which is the third paragraph on the first page
Got it.
of the permit.
Perfect. So if he clears it, puts the foundation in, we're happy that it's substantially commenced.
Right.
So
At this
we wouldn't
point,
have to
he's
keep
done.
coming back.
Absolutely, not even a tree's been cut.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I'll move it.
Moved by Art to approve with conditions, is that correct? Yep. Second? John, any other discussion, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Very good. Let's see here. Is there any old business under regulatory programs? New business? Karen, I think that concludes regulatory programs.
We're 2 minutes over, but I'll let it go this time.
Sorry, we'll work on that.
The clock behind you is right on the mark.
Mr. Lucy, 2 minutes. Thank you, Dan. Okay, I think up next we have state land. John?
Okay, thank you. The first piece of business is, I think, committee has the minutes of the February 15th meeting. Are there any comments on that, on those minutes? Can I have a motion? Bill, thank you. Thank you, Chad. Any other conversation? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Rick, can you give the planning committee report?
I can. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, I'm excited to begin my reporting to you as the Director of Planning. And it has been a busy time as I'm transitioning from prior commitments in the regulatory programs, and I try to get up to full speed in planning. I need to commend Kathy for her great organizational talent, because the report materialized with very little effort on my part, because it's a well-oiled machine and it just happened. But the challenge for me is understanding every item in that report, which I'm trying to get up to speed on. So bear with me on that. You should have a copy of the Planning Division activity report for the period, or for the months of January through February. And I'm just wondering if there are any questions on that. If not, there are a few items I would like to bring to your attention very quickly and just give a character of some of the work that has been going on in the division over the last couple of months and pull those out, just to give a sense of the breadth of the work that it is going on. Matt Kendall and Keith McKeever recently met with the town of Warrensburg board members to explain the map classification, subdivision, and jurisdiction and map amendment process to the board. Staff requested this proactively to have a meeting with the board after they had inquired about possible hamlet expansion. Resource maps were prepared and brought to the meeting for the area of interest, and staff were able to illustrate the area would not likely meet the statutory criteria for hamlet due to some significant acreages of steep slopes, poor soils, and extensive wetlands, and the character of the area being more remote and of a rural setting. I bring this up because I think after the meeting, the board members felt that it was very helpful to them, and that they were actually learning and were unaware actually of the process and the existence of the building opportunities that did exist on the land that they were trying to classify under the current classification. So the town appears to be enthusiastic to continue discussing other potential map amendment opportunities. And one of the things that they're waiting for to continue that conversation with the agency staff is to receive a new map that's being prepared by Warren County on sanitary and water supply infrastructure. But, you know, in talking with Matt and beginning to understand some of the work that he's doing with Keith, that this kind of proactive meeting was actually very effective in kind of laying out what the parameters are, what the process is, and through better understanding, the towns walk away saying, okay, we'll take another look at this and we'll get back to you. And I think people walked away from that meeting feeling better informed at that point. So under state lands, I'd just like to mention that Walt and Kevin are continuing to work on the wildlands monitoring and carrying capacity assessment with DEC. We are also continuing to work, and I'm coming up to speed on a series of management guidance efforts that have been underway, such as talking about cutting for vistas, ski trails, and primitive tent sites. Also, under state lands, I'd just like to note that transitioning from reg programs, where I was aware of the DOT's interest in the rebuilding of the bridge at the South Inlet in Racket Lake on Route 28, that that effort is ongoing right now, and at the same breath, the Blue Ridge Wilderness Plan is likely going to be coming back. It was here in November, but to continue to move that plan forward, because that plan is related to the bridge work. They do have a relationship in terms of a snowmobile trail planning that's happening in that area. And so just to say that that will be coming back in the near future, I believe. Talking to Robin and Local Government Services, Robin wanted me to mention two items. And the first is she wanted to give thanks to the 7 staff teams here at the agency who worked with the agency at the agency's exhibitor booth at the annual CEO conference in Lake Placid last week. It has been a great opportunity for staff to meet face-to-face with CEOs throughout the park and offer information and answer questions. Robin also wanted to bring up that this year's staff interacted with about 94 attendees, and we look forward to the much sought-after Certificate of Excellence in the outreach to the winning staff team at next week's agency staff meeting. You have to wait to know what the results of that are. So that's one point. The other is that the Adirondack Park Local Government Day Conference is around the corner on April 3rd and 4th. The pre-registration deadline is next week on the 20th, and we encourage anyone wishing to attend to register before then. Agency staff are processing registrations and working to finalize all aspects of the event, and we'll post agenda updates on our website. So one other item, and then just an introduction of the next presentation, but an important activity. Molly Jordan, the GIS, the map technologist here at the agency, has recently been dedicating significant time to updating a critical piece of mapping software for the agency's stereo imagery viewer. And this is actually quite important because the agency's wetland staff use the equipment for plotting wetland boundaries on high-resolution imagery. And this is critical to this desktop mapping is critical for the jurisdictional office, project review, and the enforcement program, because and at times to individual landowners who are seeking information about wetlands on their property. This update was last done in 2014, and it's very intricate, complicated software, and it has taken a great deal of perseverance on her part to to keep working through to get this solved, and I think it's near being solved, but it's an important function that happens here at the agency, and it needed attention, and just wanted to bring that to your attention. So those are really the items in my report, and I just want to, you will be now hearing Hammond Pond Wild Forest proposed final unit management plan presentation, and Corey McGee, the UMP planner from DEC's Warrensburg office, will be giving that presentation. And I just want to say that I have not actually met Corey, but her work on the plan precedes her, and I have appreciated the general thoughtfulness and clarity of the plan. I haven't been looking at plans for 10 years, and now I'm looking at them again, and I thought it was a well-prepared plan. So I don't know if there are any other questions on anything that I've presented at this point, but that's the extent of the report. Then thank you.
Nice to meet
Corey, can we say that you've put your life on the line for this UMP?
Yeah. Yeah. Feels like it. Okay. Just orient myself here. Is that good? Yeah. Okay. Hi again. I'm Corey McGee, forester in the Warrensburg office. I presented a unit overview and public draft summary at the November meeting, and so I'm going to try my best to sort of fly through the location, natural resources, and existing use, since you've already seen that, and then try to focus primarily on the summary of public comment and updated or significant management proposals from the proposed final. Okay. So the Hammond Pond Wild Forest is located wholly within Essex County in the towns of Crown Point, Elizabethtown, Keene, Mariah, North Hudson, Scroon, Ticonderoga, and Westport. It's adjacent to High Peaks, Hoffman Notch, and Farrow Lake Wilderness areas. And it's also adjacent to the following DEC campgrounds: Lincoln Pond, Sharp Bridge, Paradox Lake, and Frontier Town. It's roughly located between the sharper topography of the High Peaks and the lower-lying Lake Champlain Basin. An original UMP was adopted for the unit in 1988, and in 2017, in February, we held a public scoping meeting for the renewed effort to kick off the effort to revise the UMP. Since the original UMP, there's been a good deal of land area added to the unit, and recreational trends and public use have changed since that time. So there's the timeline of what we did in 2018, the public comment period, the presentation, the public meeting, and then the public comment period ending in December. In the unit, there's 3 segments of wild, scenic, and recreational rivers. For 4/10 of a mile near Split Rock Falls, the Bouquet, I hate saying that because I don't know if I'm saying it right, at Split Rock Falls. Then the East Branch Au Sable for about 1.5 miles in Keene. And then generally the Scroon River is also recreational, and it flows along or near the western boundary of the unit for about 14 miles between Route 9 and the Northway before flowing into Scroon Lake. There's a strong diversity of wetlands in the unit, approximately 8,000 acres, most notably East Mill Flow, and then the large wetland complex where Scroon River flows into Scroon Lake. The first picture was of East Mill Flow wetland. There are 53 ponded waters associated with the unit, most of which are quite small, and then there are 3 dams on larger water bodies, Eagle Lake, Hammond Pond, and Lincoln Pond, which is impounded by Kingdom Dam. Again, the unit's located between the High Peaks and Lake Champlain Basin. Multiple Northway pedestrian and vehicle underpasses facilitate east-west passage for people and wildlife. The UMP now supports any future efforts to better understand the efficacy of these underpasses in facilitating or not facilitating wildlife passage. The Belfry Mountain Fire Tower is a well-known birding spot in the birding community, and it's to observe hawks, eagles, other raptors as they make their way across the Champlain Valley. It's also the shortest fire tower hike in the park. It's about 0.3 of a mile. Let's see. Again, the Scroon River begins in the northern reaches of the unit, approximately at Deadwater Pond, and flows south into Scroon Lake at the southern end of the unit. Both the Scroon River and Scroon Lake are extremely important from an ecological and fisheries, from those standpoints, and they have a rich history. That's a typical pedestrian underpass under the Northway. That one's a little, they're all a little grown up like that. That one's a short bushwhack from Lincoln Pond. This map shows both aquatic and terrestrial invasive known occurrences. I wanted to include this so you can mostly notice that the documented occurrences strongly trend with major road corridors. The 4 water bodies listed on the slide are where known aquatic invasives are present despite efforts to control and or mitigate. Broadly, the unit sustains relatively low recreational use levels based on natural resource and social conditions, with a couple exceptions like Split Rock Falls, Baxter Mountain. Most of the trails in the unit are linear out and back trails well within a day's trip. And the existing parking areas are mostly adequate for the use levels. And there's 2 lean-tos in the unit right now. Okay. Sorry if that was too fast. I was worried about the time. Okay. So public comments were taken verbally and in writing at the November 13th public meeting in North Hudson, and via email and in writing and verbally during the public comment period from November 7th to December 7th, and on an ongoing basis since that time via phone, mail, or email. Comments have been received up until 2 days ago. Comments received after the proposed final was completed have been added to the record. In some cases, these themes were already incorporated in the response to comments. I just wanted to note that in UMPs, it is standard practice to excerpt from comments, especially longer ones, and organize them in the response to comment according to theme or topic area. So the next 2 slides are a general broad brush summary of the public comment topic areas. The first topic area was about the general characteristics of the unit and its ecology. I was surprised at how many, or the substance of comments about the general characteristics. There were comments that the unit is a well-kept secret, and that is a good thing, that the low use provided relatively easily accessible opportunities for solitude. The department was encouraged to better understand wildlife movement or not movement via the underpasses, and there was a caution against overdoing it with infrastructure and facilities in the unit. Regarding trails, there were general and specific comments regarding trails. There was support for the proposed North Country National Scenic Trail route across the unit. There was encouragement for any trails built to be sustainable ones. There were proposed improvements for Baxter Mountain Trail reconfigurations. Some said there were too many trails proposed in the UMP. There was support for legitimization of the existing three small segments of snowmobile trail corridor, and need for bicycle trails in the unit. Regarding accessibility and camping, there was a question about why there is a group site proposed at Deadwater and why it is accessible and or why other facilities are proposed for accessibility. Comments from the rock and ice climbing community supported making the Deadwater climbing area a model for sustainability with stakeholder involvement, and some language updates. I had some old boilerplate. The Upper Scroon River, there were comments on reinforcing efforts to study and address increased channel velocity and sedimentation that's significantly impacting the upper portion of the Scroon River from disturbance. Regarding Eagle Lake, there was a very strong local and Eagle Lake Property Owners Association objections to the draft unit management plan, actions, and the UMP process in general. These objections were regarding landowner access only properties, recreational access, emergency access, accessibility for people with disabilities, and issues with the wild forest classification of the boat access area. Management proposals for this area have been updated, and I'll go through that in much more detail. Some comments on invasive species, about how the unit might be extra susceptible to invasives due to its proximity to road corridors and the dispersion of road corridors in and around the unit. There was support for the triangular shaped parcel of Hammond Pond Wild Forest near the garden in Keene Valley to be reclassified to wilderness if possible, and support for adding the Tub Mill Pond tract to the unit. There was also support for carrying capacity and monitoring, and some caution against using this area as an overflow for the higher use areas adjacent to it. So based on public comment and continued analyses by staff and consultation with APA, some management proposals have been updated. So for time's sake, I'm only going to discuss some more major ones. And I'll note whether it's been changed or not. There's some slides where nothing has been changed and some slides where things have been changed. So APA and DEC are developing a park-wide approach for carrying capacity and wildland monitoring. I understand that this approach will be nuanced and that one size will not fit all. Each unit and areas within units have their own characteristics, use patterns, and capacities to withstand use. Hopefully this new approach will provide a full suite of options to land managers. That being said, this UMP provides a discussion of the carrying capacity concept and how it will be applied to management and monitoring of the unit. To address carrying capacity of water bodies, this unit is pretty well sprinkled with small ponds with limited access and facilities, if any, and then adjacent to several medium-sized and large lakes. However, the water body resource of this unit is potentially less significant than a unit like Saranac Lakes Wild Forest. It's my understanding that APA and DEC are also developing a guidance framework for assessing carrying capacity of water bodies. So this UMP will support that effort and will seek to better understand and manage this unit's water resources. Development of new recreational opportunities proposed in the unit have been placed into a phased hierarchy. I think it's the first appendix, and will be implemented accordingly over the life of the plan. The phases are not iterative in that everything in one phase doesn't need to be completed before completing something in another phase. However, management actions that are contingent upon one another are described as such and accounted for in that plan. And the phase approach acknowledges that completion of a facility and subsequent use will determine the future of that facility and the future of any dependent facilities. So if use level, experience, resource conditions, if any of those are not optimized, then facilities may be relocated or closed and rehabilitated. This is the core unit area. Proposals that are not in this core area are mapped elsewhere in the plan. Brown corridors are existing and yellow are proposed. And then the numbers in the maps correspond to their location in the trail inventory in the plan. One small thing is that the original public draft proposed a looping trail here. And based on public comment, which advocated for protection of sensitive areas and taking care not to overdevelop sensitive areas, it became clear that this wetland and pond heavy area was one of the more sensitive areas in the unit, and so I took it out. Same map, but I wanted to highlight the route of the North Country National Scenic Trail as proposed to be constructed across the unit. Upon completion, several of these sections will be able to provide a more remote trail experience or multiple day excursions that have previously been unavailable in the unit. One new lean-to is proposed. This is the same as the original draft. One new lean-to is proposed along the North Country National Scenic Trail route, and again, like I said, camping opportunities are going to be proposed at locations that make sense to create these multiple day opportunities. And there's still a grouping of 3 tent sites proposed at the Deadwater Pond clearing. This area has an interesting history, open areas, and shows evidence of ad hoc camping use in various spots in the area. So in addition to providing access to Deadwater Pond, its proximity to popular rock climbing routes in the high peaks might be attributed to its past use. So despite past use, this has remained in good condition, and site conditions indicate that this would be an appropriate location for a small grouping of 3 primitive tent sites, one that will be made accessible from this proposed small parking lot. It will not be designed to accommodate more than 20 people, consistent with slump guidelines regarding wild forest tent site groupings, and the sites will be monitored, and if problems arise that cannot be mitigated, will be closed, relocated, or rehabilitated as necessary. That location is here. This is Route 9, and this is the Northway, and exit 30 is right here. Whoa, sorry. This is all the same from the original public draft. There's a half-mile proposed accessible trail that will be built from the beach area in the Lincoln Pond campground across Hammond Pond Wild Forest Land to a scenic view of Lincoln Pond, and this is that view. The trail will be available to all day users and overnight users of the campground, and there's relatively few things like this adjacent to that campground, so I predict that this will be enjoyed by many users of the campground. And an accessible tent site will be constructed near the end of the Scroon River Road, and that will be accessible from the parking area. You already heard this, I'll say it again. The department has had difficulty in finding out how the Hammond Pond Trail became to be used as an ATV CP3 route. It's not described in the 1988 UMP, and it's apparent that it receives an extremely small amount of use, if any. When a bridge near the beginning of that route required replacement some years ago, it was replaced with a bridge too narrow for ATV use. Anyone who may have used the route would have had to cross adjacent private land, ford a brook, and then reconnect with the trail. The trail looks as though it has not been maintained as a road, and this UMP proposes that that trail is closed to ATV use to comply with policy and regulation. However, the Hammond Pond Trail is a lovely 0.8 of a mile walk to the pond. It's very flat, and the existing tent site at the pond will be made accessible to provide a desirable camping experience. And we are committing to complete a UTAP, Universal Trail Assessment Process assessment, on the trail itself, which provides objective information about the trail, its surfacing, and its obstacles, making it potentially usable to a wider range of visitors. I want to note that the updates to the Eagle Lake section of the proposed final UMP were not read in the redlined document that was in the mailing. The extensive edits and changes would have made for pretty tough reading, so I just replaced the old text with the new proposal. However, this issue, as you know, has been the topic of much controversy. So if the failure to redline was considered an error, then that error was mine. This is Eagle Lake here. This is the boat access area. This is State Route 74 here along the southern shore. And this is the causeway referred to in the UMP that boats travel under to access the main body of the lake. So the preferred alternative advanced in this proposed final UMP has been developed in consultation with APA to ensure master plan compliance. Alternative 3, the preferred alternative, allows for an assessment of Eagle Lake access and conditions in order to inform a future decision to do one of two things. One, either alter the site in accordance with the Slump Wild Forest Guidelines, which is alternative 2 in the plan, or 2, propose a reclassification of the area to intensive use. If the area around the existing boat access site were to become reclassified to intensive use, then it would become a boat launching site, allowing for continued float-off, float-on boat launching. Given the historic use of existing wild forest boat access on Eagle Lake, DEC will conduct an assessment over a period of up to 4 years. During this period, DEC will develop information necessary for the evaluation of boat access sites in the context of the boat access site in context of such factors as visitor use, carrying capacity, and the guidelines for an intensive use boat launching site located on page 44 of the 2016 slump. Based on the results of the assessment, the department could choose in the future to propose to APA to reclassify the site from wild forest to intensive use. Only the boat access area between Route 74 and Eagle Lake would be considered for reclassification. The remaining wild forest and wilderness, in the blue, land area around the lake would remain in its current APA land classification. Recommendations from this alternative may potentially include some kind of horsepower or motor size limitation. nothing new here. This is the Deadwater climbing area. The UMP proposes soil stabilization near climbing routes where necessary for resource protection, sustainable access routes to the climbing areas, and community engagement and support will be critical to these efforts. Again, the lines on this map are conceptual, and the numbers correspond to the UMP descriptions. So this is North Hudson, this is Route 9, this is the Northway, the Scroon River. This is where the Frontier Town Campground and Day Use area is, and this is Town of North Hudson property here. So there was a small network of trails on the Town of North Hudson land before the construction of the Frontier Town Campground. And in addition to traditional camping, the campground features equestrian camping and other equestrian facilities. To complement these new facilities, trails will be designed and constructed on the surrounding Town of North Hudson lands and on adjacent Hammond Pond Wild Forest lands. These trails will focus on front country opportunities, and a front country main trunk trail corridor will be constructed to connect equestrian, bicycle, and snowmobile users to the longer distance trails that lead to surrounding units and communities. For example, north to Palmer Pond and on to Boris Ponds. Up to 10 total miles of equestrian trail riding will be provided, may be constructed, and that's a total for both Hammond Pond Wild Forest and Town of North Hudson lands. This is new. Hammond Pond Wild Forest lands near the Northway, Exit 30, and Keene Valley provide potential opportunities in a more limited universe of opportunities to support, protect, and provide information to visitors headed for the High Peaks Wilderness and surrounding areas. Exit 30 is a primary transportation artery that flows into the heart of the most visited area in the park. Strategic planning is ongoing for how to address use and safety and provide important messages to visitors. The location and wild forest classification of this unit have been considered, resulting in 2 proposals. The first is located adjacent to the existing cleared area near King Philip Spring. That's along Route 73 right after you get off the Northway. There's open area where there's informal parking there, and there's sometimes a hot dog truck there, that spot. However, this location is on the southbound side of the road, so people coming towards the High Peaks area have to cross over traffic to get there. It also appears to be used more for climbing access and longer term parking. Okay, so on the opposite side of Route 73 is Hammond Pond Wild Forest classified land. So this is along the same side of travel as a travel direction for those headed to the High Peaks. And the site conditions are suitable for a pull-off loop with parking potentially for 5 to 10 vehicles. This is the first opportunity to provide a consistent message on the ground to visitors of the region. A DEC kiosk or other outreach platform will be able to be provided, and sanitary facilities as well. It will be designed to be reasonably screened by vegetation from Route 73 and a suitable distance from New Pond Brook, which is further in the woods. The screening from the road and the layout of the proposed facility will encourage transient parking long enough for visitors to park, use facilities, receive up-to-date information, and then continue on their travels. And if for any reason it's determined that this proposal is not needed as part of the overall strategic planning effort, then it won't be constructed. The second is part of the assessment of potential shuttle of visitors to and from the highest use areas, like Giant Mountain, Chapel Pond, the more constrained areas, and to decrease parking in those cramped areas and increase public safety. While there may be more suitable locations on private lands for a shuttle parking area, there are few suitable locations on public land. The Hammond Pond Wild Forest land along Route 9, northeast of Malfunction Junction, may be one of those few appropriate sites. This is the closest available place before the sharp terrain surrounding Giant Mountain and Chapel Pond. If the shuttle idea comes to fruition, then this site will be considered for the parking area, and the number of parking spaces will be dependent on site conditions and from the information gained from the strategic planning effort. Again, if for any reason it's determined that this is not needed, it will not be constructed. Okay. Nothing new here, but I feel it's significant, so I included it. Split Rock Falls is a popular roadside site, very popular roadside site along Route 9 between Keene and E-Town. There are currently very few state land identifiers or information, and there are long-standing resource degradation issues. The department will develop an erosion and bank stabilization work plan to halt soil loss and bank degradation. Eroded or potentially erosive areas will be stabilized, and use will be concentrated to durable, stable surfaces. We'll continue to work with DOT to limit parking to the existing parking area and ban other roadside parking. Sanitary facilities will be provided, and a short hardened pathway from the parking area to an area where the falls may be viewed from the top will be constructed and include outreach and informational messages. If a sustainable route can be found, we'll consider constructing a hardened route to the area below the falls. That's because without a designated route, visitors will still pick their way down to the area below the falls in an ad hoc fashion, furthering the spread of impact and erosion. I'm done, and this is the APA public comment period, I think. Walt never told me for sure. He said probably. Okay.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
So, yes, we had asked that Corey put this slide in the presentation to just provide the opportunity to say that the agency is now opening a public comment period for hearing on the conformance with the master plan. And that period will run from March 15th to April 15th, with the likelihood that we would be bringing the plan back for decision in the May meeting. And so if there are those who would like to provide comment, they can do so by mail, by addressing myself, Richard Weber, to submit your comments. You can also do so by email, and that email address is provided on the slide, and I think there are sheets of paper at the table here that have this same information. But you can provide a comment via email, and if you do so, please identify that it's in relation to the Hammond Pond Unit Management Plan.
A piece of relevant news concerning the unit.
Okay.
Just some relevant news. I think this was maybe 2 weeks ago. It was announced that been federal passage of an act that will finally, after a whole lot of decades of lobbying, will allow for the North Country National Scenic Trail to cross at the bridge at Crown Point and be continued on through the Middlebury, Vermont area, and then connect with the Appalachian Trail. That's huge, and it's got me kind of thinking and wondering about this unit in particular. Just because you could be at a bed and breakfast in Middlebury and have as a destination Indian Lake, North Creek. It's just that connection is just probably going to change the landscape around in terms of prospective use in the future, and probably something we ought to be thinking about. But it's brand new and long awaited.
Thank you.
Rick, a couple of questions. One, on Route 73, are those alternatives, the information booth, kiosk, whatever, and parking on each side of the road? That's a matter of study as to whether which one is more feasible?
Yes, and I think that's part of a different effort, Corey.
Yeah.
But and I think she was trying to say that if through that study in a different effort, those facilities are determined to make sense or to not make sense.
Okay.
But this plan is putting them in to condition them as being considered in this plan at this time, with the prospect that we'll get more information as to whether they're actually going to follow through on that based on other studies related to the High Peaks area. But if you wanted to...
That's right.
Okay.
You didn't want to add to that, or you did?
No, that was good. That was good. They told me to come back. So.
Oh, okay. I was unclear about the lean-tos and campsites in the proposal. Is it true that some are non-conforming now and over the course of the plan will be brought into compliance? Did I misread that?
That's true. That's true.
Okay,
yeah,
that is true.
Yep.
So they won't be done in the first phase necessarily, but,
Yeah.
you'll be working towards that.
Yes, over the life of the plan.
Okay. I guess the most heat, and if not light, was engendered by Eagle Lake. And the recommended alternative, which to me is imaginative and it goes along with the planning that we're trying to do. I mean, one thing I had an interchange with Rick about it. One thing I wanted to ask about again is if this piece were reclassified intensive use, it still wouldn't, the boat launch would still not be in compliance because it's smaller than a 1,000-acre lake. So the idea is you look at the carrying capacity, I guess, of that lake, and the whole picture may change. You may look at it differently, and that 1,000-acre may not be the mark. Is that right?
That's my understanding, that if we were to find, based on a study, that it would be better suited to an intensive use area around the boat access, that would be compliant in this case.
Okay, well then the state land master plan would have to be changed. That's all I'm saying, which,
And I guess I'd like to just step in on that. I think when talking about, looking at this situation, which is a situation that's been in existence for a very long time, actually was recognized in the 1988 plan as actually in the facilities list as being identified probably inaccurately at the time as a boat launch. And we reviewed that plan and at that time did not make issue of it, but the reality is it's incorrect. It should not have been identified as a boat launch in a previous plan. And I guess I believe that to answer your question, it would not be just the mere reclassification of the land to intensive use, would still have to address that how does it address the criteria of being a lake that's less than 1,000 acres. And so what, in my communication with you talking about this, was that looking forward, and I think that's what we're trying to do here, is look forward and say, we also know that we're on this park-wide assessment for monitoring and carrying capacity on water. And part of the result of that work, and that is work that is scheduled to be completed within 2 years. That is the intent. So at the end of that effort, we may be finding, and that through that process and becoming informed, that this long-standing, very precise line of 1,000 acres, that may in some ways be a blunt tool that through the carrying capacity analysis and the outcome of that study, we might begin to find that an amendment change to the master plan would be merited in order to deal with that in a more sensitive way. But to answer your question, I believe that it would still have to, if mere reclassification would not work and be in conformance without addressing that 1,000-acre element of the criteria.
Okay, thank you. That's exactly what the point I wanted to raise. Chad, I knew you had something to say.
Continuing on that theme, you've mentioned already that there's a carrying capacity of water bodies guidance under development. I think the UMP should reflect that. It does refer to the idea of carrying capacity, but I think it could really inform the decision, particularly in this situation as you just described it, Rick. Furthermore, there are 53 lakes and ponds in this unit that also need to be thought about in the carrying capacity. You're putting trails into areas that have not had trails before, at least not formal trails. So I think that is something that has to be acknowledged in development, and that is part of the deliberation as you move forward in the phases. I think that's an important. It's going to happen in the same time frame you're already proposing for Eagle Lake. Can I go on to a second comment?
Okay.
Well, yeah, you got it. Go ahead.
So the second one is to go back to the wildlands monitoring. I like what's written in the unit management plan related to monitoring. I think it's clear, it's succinctly written. My concern is that the implementation of it is pretty vague. If you go to the phase one, it just says develop a plan. And while that may be true, I think one could clearly predict that the mileage of hiking trails being added should be one of the major elements that one ought to look at, followed by certainly the change in tent sites, the number and location of them, the number and location of parking areas. All those things I think can be identified even now because you've already proposed their new development, that they somehow be looked at as priority items as you go through the phasing process. I don't think that's too difficult to predict that was where it'd be. Right now, again, it's vague. I appreciate that it's in there. Again, I think it's extremely well written, but actually how you go about implementing it, I think needs more clarification and more identification of what the priorities ought to be. Not a lot of writing, but just very focused.
I agree that the rubber meeting the road isn't in this plan, and that's in part because I am sort of unaware of what's happening with the framework being developed, and I want to make sure that whatever is in this UMP agrees with that. So I could maybe be more clear about that.
And my response to that would be, you know what you're proposing, so I think in the phasing, one could say that will be considered as we move through the phasing of more trails, as we move through the phasing of more parking areas. I'm just merely trying to get it articulated in the phasing.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Karen?
And also, I just want to remind everybody, because there will be the opportunity to do that, because at this stage, all we're doing, this is our action today and tomorrow is just to proceed to public comment. So this is going to come back to us again. So I think that these are all great comments, and between now and then, there'll be a 30-day comment period. What we can do, and we've had some of these ongoing conversations, and we're going to continue to refine this. So I think that when it comes back for final in May, then you'll see some of these changes. So, because remember, it's gone only through UMP comments right now, and so now it's for conformance. So we're going to have an opportunity to, I think, tweak and tighten up some things and work together. So this isn't the end of the fight of the apple.
You were right with that. We can add, I think those are good comments. I don't think there's any objection to them. If we can add them along the way, it's going to come back to us next month or whenever it comes back. Other comments, thoughts?
Why are you still up here? I want,
Or you can't sit down, I'm sorry.
I just want to acknowledge your extremely good work in putting something down on paper that's complex, has to be understood, is cutting new ground, and is done in a manner that I think satisfies all the UMP requirements, but also is imaginative and provides probably the best kind of experience for the public to enjoy these lands. So I just want to congratulate you on a good job.
Thanks, Bob.
I would second that. This is not simple, and there's been a lot of twists in the road, and I think you've reacted in a very positive way and taken the comment very seriously and implemented it where possible.
Yes. And I also think I appreciate the fact that there were a lot of letters, particularly about one or two specific areas. And Bob, you may want to speak more to it, but I appreciate the efforts to which I think all of us went to try to accommodate that situation and deal with it in a way that would be hopefully acceptable. So I'm looking forward, hopefully, to some letters that will support the alternative that is in the UMP.
I think the process has worked quite well. That's my comment to your response here.
I think it'll be an incentive for the whole planning process, too. Now, I've got specific, it has to be dealt with, and I think that's totally positive.
I found your
Howard?
candor refreshing.
Okay. I use humor when I get nervous. I'm sorry.
It's never a bad idea. Okay, well, if there's no other...
Chad's got one.
Chad, go ahead. Yes, please, I would. Thank you. Bob, second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll call for any old business, any new business. I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Now, you see, Dan, he left us a couple of minutes.
That's fine, we're doing good, we're doing good.
We had some serious business here. How far did we go over?
No, you didn't.
Oh, we were under. Oh, okay, good.
You're
That
in
was a
good
compliment.
shape, John. Thank you very much. We do. So why don't we take 5 minutes and then we're going to come back. Why don't we say at 3:35? It gives Okay, let's get started. Kathy, I think everybody will sit down when they hear your voice. Mr. Ernst is right here. Okay.
Thank you, Kathy. And I understand you have an amendation to the minutes.
Only in the box on the upper right-hand side of the first page where it says draft minutes, it said park policy and planning instead of, we had the wrong division, cut and paste, we just made a mistake. So we need to make that correction.
I was all set, Kathy.
I'm sorry.
But we have Jerry Delaney on these minutes, so we didn't go we didn't make that mistake. Okay, so with that correction,
with that correction, if
could I ask for an approval of the minutes of the February 14th? Thank you, Art. Thank you, Dan. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Get to the more interesting parts of, Kathy, take it away.
Good afternoon. You also, in this mailing, had our monthly report, or 2 months report, and I just wanted to know if anybody had any questions or comments about the different formatting.
A lot of work.
Yep, they're always doing a lot of work. And if everybody's happy with the new format, then we will continue to keep it that way. So as Terry mentioned a little bit earlier, we had Mark Brooks retire, which was very sad, but we are lucky enough to have Mary Odell step into his shoes, and she's been chosen for the biologist 2 position. And in the meantime, we are in the process of backfilling Mary's position, the biologist 1. We've posted it, and we're looking through the resumes at this point in time. We have high hopes of getting someone on board before our upcoming field season. And during that field season, it'll be at least a month, depending on the person's experience, that they basically will be shadowing Mary. So we're going to only have 1 wetlands biologist for a month once we even get somebody on board. So we're going to have a pinch point, as I said.
That's you only think a month will be enough to get somebody up to speed?
Enough to do some things.
At least to run their own on some.
Not completely on their own, yeah. But definitely until we hire the person,
Mary may
and
have a
then their
little more
first
than a month's
month.
knowledge there to
Yeah,
impart.
we've got a pinch point, and we're trying to work through it as best we can. So this afternoon, we're going to be hearing from Chris Novitsky. Chris is part of the Lake George Waterkeeper, a program which was launched by the Fund for Lake George 18 years ago. Chris's program applies research science and engineering principles for water quality protection through initiatives such as low-impact development, algal biomonitoring, and septic system management. He was recently awarded the Lynn H. Enslow Memorial Award from the New York Water Environmental Association and has in the past been recognized by the Adirondack Council as, Conservationist of the Year. Chris is a licensed professional engineer and a graduate of SUNY ESF, and today Chris will be presenting on Lake George Road Salt Reduction Program, a model for protection. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair, for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's really an honor to, talk to the board here, and I just want to thank you for your service that you do for this amazing place, a special place, and we're just proud to be a small part of this. We think a very beautiful part of it, but a small part of it, and we want to talk about some of our work that we really think are making big strides to really halt the impact of something that really is showing impacts to our water as well as to our ecology. So with that, we'll start. We've got something that we've probably all seen in the last few months, and we may see a little bit longer. But as we follow the truck, we want to talk about our agenda today. As we always start with our work with the Waterkeeper and the Fund for Lake George, it's my parent organization. It always starts with the science. So a little bit of science is good for everybody, sets the table. We'll talk about what we say is our model for enduring protection, the implementation of best practices towards the reduction of road salt, what we've developed with a partner and a client of ours, SWIM certifications, Sustainable Winter Management, and really something setting a standard that we can use to judge and use as a bar for the reduction of road salt, but not just that, implementation of practices and maintaining safe roads. Talk about some of the findings and our next steps. And really, my goal here is to inform you of the impacts to the resources of the park and really to gain support of the agency to be a partner and to move forward for reduction. So Lake George, in 1 year, 15,000 metric tons of salt is applied on public roads only. That is 3 miles of train cars along. And that's only half of it. According to SIMA, the Snow and Ice Management Association, about half of the road salt application is from private enterprises, our commercial and private roads. So they are part of this problem as well. That's the whole lake? That's the whole lake. That's the whole watershed, all 550 billion gallons. So That's a lot of salt, a lot of water, but this is what we're seeing. So our data collection with the Darien Freshwater Institute since 1980, and this is about as perfect of a regression curve as you can get. That's pretty much a straight line. It's tripled over the past 38 years, where we are at 8 milligrams per liter, which when you look at it in terms of EPA and what toxic levels are in water, I mean, it's really 230 milligrams per liter is toxic levels, but you can see the trend that we're going. But when you talk about those toxic levels, our streams are even worse. This is Westbrook, the south end of Lake George, where you can see that the salt levels get 150 times higher, and these are during runoff events. This is February 2016, but over 3,000 milligrams per liter. So you can see that this is an impact, and it is much higher in these streams than in our big bodies of water. But it's not just our surface waters. It's our drinking waters, our wells. This is a study done, Dan Kelting, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Dan. He's done significant work on surface water in the runoffs, but we've also, he's recently completed a study on the private well study in the Adirondack Park. This was funded by ADK Action and the Fund for Lake George, and these are not the most recent data, but very close, but did surveys with individuals seeking their input. They were taking the samples and submitting them to the Adirondack Watershed Institute. And basically it's about a third, the way it worked out. So 1/3 of the wells were located where there was no road runoff that impacted them. About a third were local road runoff. Those are the black dots. The red were state road runoff impacts the wells and the groundwater. So what was coming about? We found that sodium, there you see yellow is the no runoff, black is the local road runoff, red is the state road runoff. So for sodium, state roads were 9 times higher than the background, or what we call where there was no runoff. And there you can see the maximums. On chlorides, you can see 150 times state road runoff from where there was no road runoff, from the background. So really we can see that there's an influence from road runoff, and especially on the state roads. The distribution of individual wells that exceed the drinking water guidelines. Now these are guidelines from Department of Health, not standards. But you can see on the left, sodium, that's 20 parts per million. People with hypertension and concern with salt-restricted diets. Half of the wells in the state road areas exceed that guideline. Local, there's 10%. Regarding chlorides, 250 parts per million, that's the guidelines. Quarter of the wells are being influenced by the state road runoff. So really, you can see that there are impacts. Now with chloride, it's not a health issue as much of an aesthetic. It starts tasting salty, and the color starts getting a little not as clear, so that it's more of an aesthetic. But clearly you can see that there are impacts to surface as well as groundwater. Now moving on to the ecological impacts. We are all aware of the balance that there can be between the zooplankton and the phytoplankton in our water bodies, which really is the basis of the food chain. And through the research of the Jefferson Project, our partnership with IBM and with Darien Freshwater Institute shows that as sodium chloride builds up in our waters, it really can kill zooplankton. And what the problem is that then creates an imbalance, and you wind up with increased phytoplankton algae growth, chlorophyll A. So this was done through studies at what they are called mesocosm, which are really experiments in large tubs with Lake George water where they can control the amount of salt that's put in and conditions. And you can see, again, as the phytoplankton increases, the zooplankton decrease, and that leads to increased algae blooms. You know, on a related note, we've been monitoring Lake George, taking algae samples for the last decade. And we swim along the shoreline and use algae and indices to give us water quality data, because algae live in the water column, live in the lake, and instead of a water sample, which is just a snapshot, These species live there, and nearly 100% of our algae samples, and we've got nearly 300 over the past decade, show that there are impacts from salinity on the salinity index. So that shows that that is building up in our waters and having an impact on really the basis of our food chain. But, you know, the other impact that you can see is as the chlorides increase and it upsets that balance of zooplankton, phytoplankton, what feeds on the, oh, thank you, what feeds on the algae is also being impacted. So our macroinvertebrates, the snails, the branded mystery snail that creep along the lake bed and eat the algae, they get impacted by the buildup of salt. Also the amphipods, so again, the other macroinvertebrates that feed on the algae, they're decreasing, so this kind of compounds the impact of road salt and leads to increased algae growth. And then some species that aren't even affected by high levels of chlorides, up to 1,000 milligrams per liter. Isopods, the periphyton, which is actually the benthic algae growth that coats our rocks in the lake bed, and fingernail clams. So again, species that are not as desirable can thrive at these higher levels of chlorides. And even the sex of frogs can get impacted by salt. So here we have tadpoles, 2 months of salt exposure, and we see now a shifting in the actual species, the gender population, 10% more males as they're exposed to salt. And it's not just that. We found in fisheries our research with the Jefferson Project on trout hatchlings. So trout hatchlings that are subjected to salt exposure tend to be 15% smaller than trout that are not exposed to that. So you can see the compounding of this in our waters, also in our ecology. So how do we address this? So at the fund, we've developed what we call our model for enduring protection. So really, it's based on 3 things: partnership, innovation, and investment. And we use that to address issues such as invasive species, road salt, our water quality and clarity through stormwater and wastewater management. And really, we like to use, as we say, science to solutions and use that model. So on partnership, the Save Lake George Partnership was started to stop aquatic invasives entering Lake George. And as we sat around the table with the elected officials, we addressed the invasive species issue and implemented the first mandatory boat program east of the Mississippi. While we were sitting around the table, why not use that same framework to address an issue like road salt? So we, in 2015, around the table, developed an MOU and had every municipality around the lake sign that. There was nothing financially committing them to this, but it just said, we want to take a look at the science. We realize this is an issue. We want to bring in experts to train our highway departments. We want to give them the best equipment available, and we want to host a road salt summit. So again, base it on science, come together, talk about the issues, and we had a basin-wide commitment from every municipality around the lake. Innovation. So what do we do to address this? As we had our summits, we created a best practices agreement. And I'll talk about these in a minute, but to calibrate, measure, prevent, optimize, so really take these practices and had the municipalities agree to them and to move forward on that. We held our annual SALT Summit. We just had our 4th last October, where we bring in experts from around the country. We work with equipment providers, and they come in to bring demos, and we have presentations on the impacts that we are seeing to our ecosystem. So with that, we can really set the table, and it's really an area that we can have discussion amongst the actual people that are there, the people that are behind the wheel and applying the salt, and really expand and engage not just the publics, but the privates, because again, those are a big part of it. So here's a list of some of our sponsors: Arrowhead Equipment, so we've got the privates with the equipment, other NGOs, the Sea Grant, the Lake George Association. We partner with SIMA, the Snow and Ice Management, national and international management organization associated with the winter management industry, and we also have teamed up with engineering firms. WIT Advisors in the lower right corner there is one of our consultants on this, and Phil Sexton will talk about some of his work. But really bringing that all together is bringing the answers to the people that we are asking that are out there doing the applications. And then investment, that's really where we think the fund separates ourselves from other organizations. We are approaching about $500,000 over the past 5 years, investing in grants and in experts and in technology. We've invested with a company, Viasis, that has developed software which we call the black box. So right here you can see that. That's inside of CAB. We have 23 of these black boxes in municipal trucks and county trucks around the watershed. So every 20 seconds, they record the amount of salt that is being added and then pings it up to the cloud, wherever that is. And that information is collected by our consultant, Viasis, and then we use that to look at trends and find out ways that we can reduce road salt. We'll get into that in a minute. But then we also bring in techniques and equipment. The live edge plows, I hope that a lot of you have heard about that, but we provided grants 4 years ago to the town of Lake George and the town of Hague to actually purchase and give these plows to the town. So really, instead of a 11, 12-foot metal plate across the bottom, this actually has metal plates that are 2 foot wide and actually conform and contour to the roads better. So they can scrape off the roads, remove areas where snow can build up and turn into ice, and that's where you add more salt. So really it's, think of a razor with multiple blades that can really shave closer to you. And then education and training. We cannot ask our public officials and operators to do better unless we bring in experts. So here, this is our last SALT Summit in October. Diana Clonch, who ran a regional office in the state of Ohio for decades, and now is a consulting firm and provides training and information to highway departments. So again, investing, bringing the experts in so that we can really give our operators the best opportunity to reduce road salt and bring in the equipment so that they can do that. And all this, again, is around these practices, the 6 best practices: measure, calibrate, prevent, analyze, improve, and optimize. And with that, and with our consultant, WIT Advisors, WIT, W-I-T, stands for whatever it takes. And that was Phil Sexton, but he developed this system because really, how do you know if you're doing a good job? And to set up a set of standards for sustainable winter management. That's what SWIM stands for. And we'll get into how you achieve that and what the standards are. First is measure. So if we want to reduce road salt, you have to know what you're putting down before you can actually say that you're reducing it. Historically, you've always said, you went to the town clerk and you said, how much salt did we purchase? How many roads do we have? And you divide it out, and that's what your application rates are. But that doesn't take into account the roads, the grades, the equipment, the weather conditions. So now when we started measuring and tracking, we really have the ability to know what they're putting on every 20 seconds. And so this box is hooked up to a magnet on the back of the hopper and the spinner and the conveyor belt. So it determines the amount of times that rotates and then calculates the amount of salt that's added, and then that's how that is measured. Well, how do you determine the amount of salt? You've got to calibrate. And historically, again, the highway departments don't do this. They really should do this about every 2 to 4 weeks. The highway equipment takes an awful beating during the season, tons of salt getting dropped in, the buildup of the salt and corrosion on the gates, and you don't know if the gates are working right or not working right. So you really should take a look at your equipment and calibrate that and make sure that that is putting down what it says that it is. And it's not just an environmental issue, it's an economic issue. If your equipment's not functioning right, you could be putting down, and we found that some operators were putting down twice as much salt as they thought they were. And that becomes a dollar issue, especially for these smaller municipalities. And this needs multiple training. We have provided about 5 to 6 trainings. And I remember they say when you were younger listening in school, you needed to be repeated 7 times to learn. I think my dad said I needed about 10 or 12. But here, we need multiple training because these guys, at first, they're kind of half listening. We buy them a lot of donuts, we get them to listen, and we provide the training. But then they start to get engaged and they start to understand why when we start to show them what the data that we're getting. And so we get into prevent. On the left, you can see the live edge plow again. And the effectiveness of that. Now, in the town of Hague, I go over Tongue Mountain, if you're familiar with Lake George, the mountain between Bolton and the town of Hague. I travel that every day. And it can be pretty hairy in the winter. The town of Hague got a live edge plow, and they said the first year that they had that, a typical storm, it would take 3 passes to go over the mountain to clear it. With this piece of equipment, they could do it in 2 turns. So there you can see right now, you're reducing your road salt in maybe about 1/3 with just this equipment, let alone the overtime and the time on the drivers. In the middle and on the right, you see the application of brine. Really, brine is very important. Brine is the application of salt water, 23.3% salt. So about a day before a storm event, the trucks go down and spray the roads. This is in the town of Hague. And then when the storm comes, that moisture from the snow starts to activate that salt that had dried and turned it into a brine, which really coats the road. Similar to when you're cooking and you spray your pan so that your food doesn't stick. This is the theory on highways, and it's good for twofold. Number one, it makes it easier to remove so you don't have the buildup of the snow turning into ice, so you got to add more salt. The other thing is, this can buy the drivers an hour or 2 during an event. So the picture on the right shows about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch early part of the storm. So when it starts, a driver maybe can come in at 5 o'clock in the morning instead of 3 or 4 o'clock. Very important for them as they work their 12-hour shifts. And really, it reduces the addition of road salt. So we've got the trackers, we've got equipment, we need to analyze this. And this is where we start getting into the science and the software. So on the right, you see really the tracking of that tracker in the cabs. And I'll show you how that goes in a second. But then we also realized that there was a piece missing. How do we know how effective this is? So we started placing some road cameras around the basin on key roads, key locations, so that we could see how the salt was being affected. We could start comparing truck A to truck B. Truck A is adding twice as much salt as truck B, but they're both reaching bare road pavement about the same time. So something's not right there. And then we can start looking into that. And that is also an asset to the highway departments because they can access those cameras over the web and actually see what road conditions are and make a determination on when they have to go out. So I'm hoping this works. Yeah, so here's what they see at, I'll say Command Central. Here's a snow event. Here's the actual trucks going through during an event. Every 20 seconds, that data is being collected, sent back, and we can see at 7 o'clock where the truck is, what they're adding. They're going back to Warrensburg. These are actually the Warren County trucks, getting filled up and then going back out on their routes. Every 2 hours, they go back on a beat, so we can start determining how that application is being processed. But again, it's more than that. We got to compare it and determine whether it's being effective. And the way we did that, this is, I hope that's working. Oh. Of course, this video is not working. But this was a time lapse of Oops, I'm sorry. Well, this is supposed to run you through a event of the time-lapse camera so that we could see as the snow event goes on, as the trucks go by, as the road get clear, it goes back to bare pavement, and then we can start really seeing to verify the level of service that goes back to the road application work. And we can see, again, start tweaking out the differences, the specific weather events, and how that snow is building up, how the application rates are working. So what does this all result in? Well, way too much data for you to see at 4:05. But this is what comes in. Just the data. We can compare truck to truck, route to route, equipment to equipment, until your eyes start going crazy. But really, this, you could compare drivers to drivers. You can start seeing trends in areas where that we need training and improvement. And then what we do is we take the forecasting. I mean, so we all know you need to incorporate the weather because the temperature, the air temperature, the moisture content, each storm is a little different, as we can all know, and the length of and the intensity of the storm. So what our consultants actually did was created an algorithm on weather events so that we could start comparing apples to apples. And they developed 4 different severities of storm. So with that, we can start comparing apples to apples. And then what we do is we sit down with the drivers. This is with the town of Lake George in our office, and we show them what we're seeing on the screens. We show them the truck routes, we show them the graphs, we show them the outputs, we show them the cameras, and through that, we can educate them on what we're seeing, discuss the recent storm event, find out why they made decisions, find out why specific drivers are applying specific rates, and when they say, no, I'm only applying this much, we can actually pull up the data and say, well, no, actually, the driver's putting down this much, and we can start tweaking and make better decisions so that we can really use that to reduce road salt, save money, and save our environment as well. So some of the findings of all this. So we talked about, this is a group of different municipalities around Lake George. We have the 4 weather event categories. The blue is less severe, so that's kind of around freezing temperatures, all the way to the right, which is the purple, which is your most severe, really down near 0. And what we found when we started talking to the towns is here you can see application rates where they're adding the most salt when the weather is the warmest. So really you can see that that's an area, an opportunity that they can save. Where what you really want to see is you want a bell curve so that when it's warmer, the blue weather condition, you add less salt. Salt is most effective around 15 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the middle, the red and green. And then as it gets colder, salt is less effective, so you stop adding it. And that's what you want to see, that trend. So again, this is a learning and training opportunity. The other findings we saw, so we can compare roads that don't have as much slope to roads that are very steep. And what we found really, this particular municipality, there was no difference really in the application rates on the roads that were not steep on the left side to the group on the right where it was on hills. So really, is that another learning opportunity? Because you don't need to add as much road salt where the grades aren't as much. You don't need as much traction going up. So again, another learning opportunity. These are findings on the live edge plow. So truck 13, this is in the town of Lake George, had the live edge plow at the beginning of the season, and then truck 42 did not. So here you see truck 13 uses 40% less salt. So right here you're seeing savings from equipment. Halfway through the season, we reverse it. We give the live edge plow to truck 42. Truck 13 doesn't have the live edge plow. He's really upset with us. And this is what we found. Truck 13's rates actually went up 25% with the change in that equipment. Truck 42's rates come down is what you would think, but not to the level of truck 13 earlier. So again, the equipment is showing that it's reducing road salt, but here you can see that there are opportunities to work with the specific drivers and to see if we can reduce road salt further. bringing in our temperature. I'll go through this quick, it's late, but this is a arch and plotting of application rates with temperature. So right in the middle, this is in Celsius, so around -8, again, that's around 18 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when salt really is optimum, and as it gets warmer, you don't need to apply as much. As you go to the left here, it gets cold down near 0, you don't need to apply as much. But again, this is kind of flat. This isn't what you want to see. This is a different driver. You can see he understands, and he really varies his application rates to the temperature. So you can see the steepness of the curve, more effective, using less salt when it is less effective, and that's what you want to see. And these are the things that we go over with the drivers. So now comparing lane mile routes, same storm, particular roads. This is in the town of Lake George again. Baker's Crossing. Why is that twice as much as Goggins Road? Same road conditions, same storm. Again, training and opportunities to reduce road salt. Meet with the drivers and talk about this. So now this is the graphs that we are now sharing with the drivers. So on the bottom, these are the application rates, 0 to 800. On the left, you can see the application rates that are measured. So those are the amount of pings every 20 seconds for the specific application rates. So what you're seeing here is a driver that's starting to learn. You want to see those rates move to the left. You want to see those bars increasing. So again, as they learn their routes, learn the application and weather specific, you can start seeing again those graphs, bar graphs, start moving to the left, where they're reducing their road salt applications while maintaining safe road conditions. And again, what is the goal? So taking into temperature, taking into account weathers, we want to go from that condition to this, so where we understand the impacts and influence of weather, and we can reduce road salt to be more effective and reduce waste. So again, when you see a group of road application rates and you see they're out of skewed, you really want to make them more linear, make that more leveled out. And what you start seeing is this is going to be your savings as you move over, and it becomes an economic issue. And again, what the goal is that we want to see SWIM certification, Sustainable Winter Management. This is the town of Lake George. They were the first municipality in the country to receive SWIM certification. These guys were not believers. 4 years ago, they did not want us coming into their garage. They kind of laughed. The guy that's holding the plaque right there, Dan Davis, really, wasn't a believer. Said, I'll go along because my board is telling me to do this. We gave him a live edge plow, and he came back and he goes, this is his words because I don't say it like this. He goes, Chris, I'll eat crow because that live edge plow is the best thing that we ever got. And now they have a fleet of those, and they're reducing their road salt, and they're really taking a look at the data that's coming available. So, closing out, moving ahead, what are our next steps? So we want to develop policy. We want to use this information. We want to take that information on weather. We want to start developing specific application rates to specific storms. And typically they have 1 or 2 application rates. We open our gate to 2 inches and that's what it is. No, we want them to start tweaking it. If it's going to be a higher intensity duration event, don't apply that salt heavily during the event because in the next 2 hours, you're going to come by and plow it right off. So really try to brine early and try to brine throughout the event, or early, allow that brine to work throughout the event, and then, hit it with salt at the end. Also, speaking about the brine, I forgot to mention this earlier, but we need to thank our Senator Little, for a grant, and also the Department of Environmental Conservation. They provided a grant that allowed now every municipality in the Lake George Basin to have a brine storage tank, a tank for a truck, and a spreader. So really, that was, we got to thank Senator Little again for that, and as well as the DEC. And to develop that policy and to know what your level of service is. How quick do you want to get to bare roads? and to set your rates going at that. And we really want to enable self-assessment. What that means is to open this data up to the drivers as we train them. Next year, we believe we can start opening these portals to them. They can look at this data and start making their own assessments and determinations, and really engage and empower them. When they start to calibrate their equipment, they're buying into this program and really understanding the importance of it. We want to expand swim. This is, the town of Lake George was the first. We have Warren County DPW lined up, and also the town of Hague to possibly receive certification this year. We need to engage the privates. Again, they are half of the problem. We need to, and we're starting to meet with some of the larger resorts in the Lake George area. I know up in Lake Placid there's been some discussions and with some of the resorts up there. So really they're a big part of it and part of the solution. DOT commitment. This is actually a photo of a recently installed low salt area on Route 9N. They have 2 pilot projects in the Adirondack Park right now. Route 9N from Lake George Village up to Tongue Mountain. You can see Tongue Mountain in the background there. This is right where County Route 11 comes down, north of Bolton off of exit 24. And then there's Route 86 from Wilmington through and outside of the village of Lake Placid. They're engaged in this. We've seen in Lake George that they've brought in their 2-stage plow, so better plow equipment, but we haven't seen the brining applied. We're talking about outreach committees, so really, and we're talking about partnering with them on monitoring. So really, we want to have them step up and be part of this solution. Our goal in Lake George is to have 50% reduction by 2020, and we're on our way. We feel that we can reach that, especially with now engaging the drivers and the highway departments and showing them this data and showing them the savings. And then we need to monitor this. We need to know that we're doing the right thing. So here's some of our monitoring that we have. This is actually along the Route 9N project. So those are continuous loggers in there. It hasn't been the easiest winter to assess them and collect the data. We were out there Tuesday, and I'll just observation. Tuesday is the coldest day of the week in the Adirondack Park. That's our sample day, and every Tuesday it was in single digits this winter. Right now there's about 12 inches of ice over that logger, so it's been a struggle. But we've gotten data, so you can see where there's rain events on the graph on the right. Those bars, you can start seeing the spikes in the runoff and the specific conductance, which is tied to the chlorides in the runoff. So really, as we've reduced road salt and we've got the historical data around the watershed, we want to start seeing the drops in the chlorides in our streams. So our takeaways and closings, you made it through those graphs and data. Excessive road salt has significant impacts on our surface and groundwater and our ecology. The Fund for Lake George has developed a model for enduring protection based on partnership, innovation, and investment, where we apply our science to solution, really use science to guide the solutions and use science to show that the solutions are working, and that road salt reduction can be achieved through implementing those best practices and technology to engage the operators, to self-assess, make them part of this solution, and develop sound policies. And the key, while maintaining safe roads. We need to travel around the park to get to where we're going. We need to do it safely, but we can do it with less road salt, and I think that's what this project has shown. So with that, I will take any questions. I want to thank you again for this opportunity. And this is a picture, talk about the privates. This is the Rite Aid parking lot in Lake George. That is not ice, snow on that parking lot. That is road salt. And again, that's a big part of our problem as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. That was very, very impressive.
Thank you.
I wondered, what are the financial implications of this for the town. I mean, I understand that there are long-term benefits. There's a reason to do this other than financial. But how do you weigh the upfront investment in terms of a payback over less salt, fewer hours out there on the road?
We are trying to put that together right now because we're just seeing the reductions, and with the variability in weather that we have, that's going to start coming out, I think, in the data. The town of New Hartford, right outside of Rome, invested heavily in brine a few years ago and spent about $200,000 in brine equipment. They saw that payback over a 3-year period. So we feel it's about that 3-year period that you reach that break even. Live edge plows, they're more expensive. I'm not going to say that they're not. They're about 80% more than a standard plow. But again, if you can start reducing your road trips, going over Tongue Mountain one less time, that starts building up in your road salt reductions. So again, I think it's about a 3 to 4 year break-even point, and then you can start seeing the reductions. Town of Queensbury spends about $260,000 on road salt. So if we can start saving 25% of that, that's real dollars.
What's the black box? Is that very expensive?
The black box and the software is not, you're talking about probably $1,000 for installation on that. The cost on that has been our investment with VASIS, which is the monitoring and those graphs that made your eyes go blurry.
Yeah.
They have a bunch of research. They're from Waterloo, Ontario, and they're associated with Waterloo University, so we can get some cheap graduate students to put those graphs together. But what our goal is that we can now point to that and show that it works, so we can take a lot of that labor out now, that research, and just start applying the findings and point to that as success. So, it's each one of those cameras needs about, we got to invest about $1,000 for the data storage. You're talking about pings every 20 seconds. That adds up. I never knew that. You got camera shots every half hour on the roads. That's what those cameras take, about every half hour. So you need storage for those cameras. So it's the data that builds up. That winds up being about $40,000 in data storage. So, but as we can point to this and show its effectiveness, we can bring those costs down.
I think that'll be important. Do you have something, Karen? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just had a quick question.
Go ahead, Bob.
I think you correctly point out, first off, great presentation.
Thank you.
And you correctly point out that safety needs to be maintained. Is there any metrics you can use to convince somebody that might say, I don't know that I believe that you might be thinking about to help demonstrate that?
We've had meetings. We've had meetings with DOT on that. We've had meetings. Accident records, really, not everybody reports their accidents. This year I slid off Tongue Mountain, first time in 15 years during one of these ice storms. These are the things that don't get reported, so a lot of the accidents probably don't get reported. The only things, unfortunately, that do probably are the fatalities and whatnot. So it's hard. We're trying to find that information and actually working with DOT, and DOT understanding, there's this cloud of liability that then hangs over this, and are you reducing road salt, creating unsafe conditions? And that's been some of DOT's concern about, we have these application rates, but we don't know what DOT's applying, and there's some concern on liability if that becomes public information, and there, God forbid there's accidents or things like that. So it's tough. That's a tough measure, but we're looking into that and trying to get that info. Good question. Yes, Bill.
There was an environmental project involved with the Charlie Wood project we did, and that was supposed to take care of a lot of the runoff from, I think, the North Wayne Route 9 through Westbrook. Has that been successful?
And thank you, Commissioner Thomas, on that project. It is very successful, but what we found is, and what many people know, you cannot treat road salt. So we collect all the runoff from Route 9, and it's very effective. We are removing 80 to 90% of the phosphorus, of the nitrates, 95% of the total suspended solids, but chlorides you cannot treat. Chlorides, that's why they're a problem in the groundwater. Once they get in our environment, they're there. So unfortunately, we are not treating. The way to treat the road salt, and we're using that, to talk with our partners at DOT, that we need to reduce the application rates. So that's the only way to treat road salt at this time.
So if you show the graph of the increasing levels in Lake George, concentrations. So if you can't treat it, does that go down over time, or does that stay where
Yeah, actually, great question, but I didn't throw that graph into you because I didn't want you to totally lose you, but we actually did a study on the modeling, and if we reduce road salt by 50%, in 25 years, we can see a reduction of chlorides in Lake George of 40%. So that was based on actual studying of the release of the cations from the soils based on when you add sodium, sodium binds with the soil and releases calcium and whatnot, and we use that modeling to predict what would happen as we move forward, and then with the circulation and clearing of the lake as the lake flushes, that's how we determine that. So if we do reduce road salt, we can see that come down in the future.
Jerry, you had something?
So, as a local government and sitting on a board on local government where we have these discussions, I mean, in my town, we use a salt sand mixture. And unfortunately, we just had a meeting where the highway superintendent asked to put more salt in the sand so we could clear the roads faster. And it's the exact opposite direction of where we're trying to go. I have some real questions about brine. I travel a lot of roads. Vermont uses a lot of brine, and in a snowstorm, they can be some of the most dangerous roads I've ever driven on. That first heavy little bit of snow, boy, when that brine starts working, you can really set yourself up for an ice storm type roadway. It's really slippery. The live edge plows, have you seen any increased maintenance of those? I mean, I already see some issues with them, but I'm more concerned about the maintenance level.
Right. We, live edge plow, we have not seen any maintenance issues with that. We have gotten, or the towns have gotten, some backup plates. They've been able to maintain them. I guess where they've seen the wear is where the two plates come together and that corner becomes rounded, and there may be a little line of snow left in the road. My understanding, I know Ed's in the back of the room with DOT, but DOT tried a live edge plow. There was some concerns on problems that they had with some of the welding, and they met with the company, and I think they've worked to resolve that issue out. But I have not seen the maintenance problems. There was some concerns with the kickback that may happen, with potholes or sometimes with where there were manholes, but really that kickback should actually be less with the live edge plow than with a standard straight plow where you don't have that flexibility. So I haven't seen it. Regarding the brine, Jerry, valid question, and that's why the weather is so important. If it gets really cold, really shouldn't be putting the brine down, because then the brine, the salt water can actually freeze in a worse condition because it freezes in plates. Yep. And that's when it gets real greasy, as we say. So I agree with you on that, but that's why we need to educate and engage our operators a little bit more. And last comment on adding more salt to sand. What we found, especially through working with SIMA and others, our consultant, Phil Sexton, if you go to a 50-50 sand salt mix, that's actually the least effective mix that you can have, because you don't have enough sand to give you the traction, and you don't have enough salt to really melt the ice, so you're kind of in the middle. You're better off using less salt, more sand, if that's what your goal is to gain traction. So I'd kind of steer away from that 50-50.
Well, we're trying to stay in that 5 to 7%, which is supposedly the optimum for it. For what we're trying to do is just to try to keep the sand from freezing, so it's not a problem in your equipment. My biggest problem is, how do we engage all of these small towns? You've put an immense amount of resources into engaging just one basin, and you can't do that statewide.
No.
It's not financially viable. How do we engage those? I know what it's like on a local level, just trying to engage it on your own. So how do we do that?
A couple things. Well, we want to point to this and say that this has worked, and hopefully we don't need to have as much investment and as much data and graphs, and we can have the operators speak to operators. That's what our goal is to have, the Dan Davises of the world and the Rob Valplexes who are driving those trucks speak to the other operators and say, hey, this really works. They don't want to hear from me. They'll kind of nod. And so that's one thing. Second thing is we've actually got some grants where we're going to be bringing some of these, that woman, Diana Clonch, who I had in the photo earlier, to provide training in 3 counties. This is going on through ADK Action as well. Hamilton, Essex, in Clinton, I believe. So we're going to be providing full-day training with her, and she's outstanding. I mean, she really is. So hopefully we'll buy lunch and bring everyone in and have some demos. So I think that's another way. So it really, operators talking to operators and then bringing in experts to show them. And then if we can point to something that does work, maybe with that, they'll start believing. And we'd love to come out and talk. We'd be glad to do that if that will help.
Karen, you've been very patient.
No, that's okay. I want everybody to ask their questions.
I don't want to go over. I'll get in trouble.
No, it's okay. I'll take the heat for this one. It's my turn. At lunchtime, we actually were talking about this whole issue with salt, and what brought it up was on Friday, I was at an FPAC meeting, and Ed France, I'm glad you mentioned him, who's in the back from DOT, made a presentation about salt and just what happens on the roads on an area that is shaded by trees versus the other side of the road that's got sun, and it's twice, you're putting down twice as much salt. I mean, that's just mind-boggling, really is. I feel that this issue, and I thank you as well as Ed and everybody who has really brought this issue to the forefront. I mean, it's been out there for a while, but I just don't get, there wasn't the sense of urgency, and I feel now the sense of urgency, much like we had climate change last month. We talked about we got to do something now, and I sense there is that willingness and awareness again. I think a lot of people weren't aware of it. So my question then is, what can we do for you? What are next steps? How do we help? How do we engage? I think education and awareness are a huge part of this, and I know I keep going back to boat washing stations and things like that, but we've made tremendous strides with invasives by just engaging the public through ads, radio ads, and all kinds of material, and there's been so much buy-in. So is there anything we can do to help you as you move forward, and what are your next steps?
I know last year, this was one of the sessions at the local government day, so you don't want to oversaturate that, but that clearly is an opportunity, maybe in another year, to have as another repeat session to bring in the data that we're having, to maybe link with our website and the information that we have, so we can share. So as Jerry said, the towns around the park can have that information. And then as we develop these outreach groups with DOT on the pilots to have, representative from the agency at that. I'm not sure if that's allowed through interagency legalities. I'll let you guys figure that out. But if you could be at that table and find out the discussions going on and have that input. And then as you review projects, there are things you can do on projects probably to consider this as you move forward, maybe on project review. We've developed a low-impact development certification system, and we have that as one of the credits on that scoring, road salt reduction. So when you design a project, you can bring that into account and try to figure out how to reduce road salt on a project, similar to what you said, to clear trees. I mean, that's obviously a touchy issue, but I mean, that's really a common sense one. And as we say, use science to guide our solutions. So I've had my meetings with, highway superintendents on areas that they've cleared 50 feet wide because that's a bad section of road. Well, maybe a bad section of road, I don't think we need to clear 50 feet, but if you take out, a few trees in the area of an overhang of where there's a cliff or something, that makes sense. And so we need to bring that logic in as well.
And that was the subject of the discussion, I think, on Friday. We talked about that because there is a balancing act that goes on there between protecting the natural resources, but trees, clean water, and so you've got to take all those things into consideration. But I think that it's a good dialogue for all the stakeholders to have and to try to work together to come to some consensus to talk about science, but also just common sense and health people. So there's a lot.
And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but to educate our drivers that are coming up. We hear it a lot. People that may come up from down south, have got to realize they've got to slow down. That's why we really pushed DOT, and we were glad to see those low salt areas signs put up. We've taught similar to the way that our organization put together some of the public service announcements for the boat washing and invasives. Let's have them and pay for those for the public so that when they come up here, they're aware of that. So.
I would like to applaud DOT for having the courage to try things like that area you're saying from Wilmington to Lake Placid and reducing the speed from 55 to 45 during the winter months. Hopefully we'll learn from that. It might be good, might not matter, but at least we're taking steps to try. And I think it's exciting to hear you taking the initiative to try to make a difference, because I think supposedly Mirror Lake is the most polluted lake in the park from a salt standpoint. And so obviously Lake Placid is very concerned about that, and how do they handle that. And one of the issues is it's completely flat around lakes. So why are we salting? If it's flat. I mean, I understand when there's hills in the Adirondacks and you got to salt hills, but your point earlier in the discussion saying that the rates of application were the same on flats as they were on hills. I mean, it's pretty logical to anyone who's practical that you should salt the hills more than the flats.
And that's why we need to provide the training, as we said, and we think that, again, spending the time maybe in Lake George, and we can go to elsewhere where we don't have to spend that time and just point to that, and people will realize that yeah, we don't need to apply on the off of the hills. So.
Right.
Well, I think this is a terrific model program, and I thank you for describing it. I love the idea of having the drivers that have been trained talk to other drivers, because this is insider talking, and their questions get answered, and I think that's a great way to push this program forward. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming.
Thank you for your work, by the way. Thank you.
Chris, don't go away. We have something for you. we have a little token of appreciation, and you get to have a photo snapped with all of us.
Thank you very much. Show us the right. One, two, three. One, two, three.
Thank you, Chris. Hey, this was great.
Great program. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And is that it for today, right? Okay, so that ends our program. What? Oh!
Let me close my
You're right. Okay, hold on, everybody. We got a little more to do. Hold on.
All right, one second. Old business for park ecology, new business. Okay, we close the committee. Now you go.
There we go. Okay, so that ends our program for today. Tomorrow morning at 9, for a half an hour, we're going to have an executive session to get some updates, and then we will reconvene here at 9:30. All right? Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Hope to see you tomorrow. We are adjourned for the day.